Chapter 651. Though Chaotian couldn't share the same winter and summer, they could share the same sunset glow, though it was a fake sunset glow. Countless sword wheels danced and traveled in the square of the royal palace toward the outside of the city, cutting the spring sunlight falling down from the sky into pieces and refracting it into a warmer, fiery light. In the center of the fake sunset glow, Ping Yongka sat on the ground with his eyes closed, his face ashen. Every part of his body was trembling incessantly. Every time his body trembled, a pure and sharp sword would come out. Standing in front of the grand hall and watching the scene, Apiao's face was even paler than Jingjiu's. The black hair in front of her forehead tousled in the wind, and her voice trembled slightly. "What the hell are you doing? You are risking your life." The great formation of the royal palace had already been activated, pressing down on the old plum garden like a real mountain. A violent wind whipped up on the street outside the old plum garden. The owners of the chess stalls fled in all directions, crying and screaming, not knowing what was going on. Standing by the lakeside, Lu Shui looked at the old nunnery on the other side of the bridge, his body trembling slightly, his feet sinking into the ground. The lone sword left his wrist and shot into the nunnery after turning into a flash of silvery light. But it didn't sever the connection with him. He could sense what the lone sword was doing, and he knew it was the sword formation of slaying fairies set up by his young master. But whom did Gu Qing and Ping Yongka intend to kill? Thinking of all this, Jing Zhu crossed his arms in front of his face and took a step toward the bridge. The bridge collapsed after one step. Then, countless cracking sounds rang out, and innumerable sparks appeared on his arms. The sword wills of the sword formation of slaying fairies were too powerful. Crushed by the great formation of the royal palace, the sword wills were like real flying swords, able to cut everything in their path to pieces easily. In an instant, the cloth on Lu Shui's arms was torn to shreds. In the next moment, the cloth on his body was torn apart in many places. It was then that he suddenly heard a gloomy and brutal shriek in the sky. In the next moment, he saw two shadows landing on the surface of the lake. The dark phoenix descended from the sky, spreading his wings as dark as the night. The tail feathers of more than 100 feet long turned into a real sword. He broke through the great formation of the royal palace by force and flew toward the old plum garden. Lu Shui was well aware of how powerful this Aoyama's defense was. He drew back his arms and held the guard city pin in his sleeve with his right hand. As he was about to wield it, he suddenly sensed a dark energy coming from the west of the city. As expected, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect had come to Zhaoga City. The sound of chanting came from outside the old plum garden. Countless petals appeared in the sky, and a beam of light appeared in the rain of petals. The beam of light was actually made up of dozens of light rays. It looked like a cage, locking the dark phoenix in the sky. The dark phoenix let out an angry shriek as he attempted to break through those rays of light. Along with a sizzling sound, the colorful feathers gave off green smoke, bringing him extreme pain. But how could pain stop it? The dark phoenix kept on crashing into those rays of light, along with the increasingly frenzied whistling. Boom! The whole of Zhaoga City could hear the sound of the dark phoenix and sense the dreadful quakes in the sky. The people came out of the room in terror. They couldn't help but scream in terror when they saw the huge bird dashing in the beam of light. The people outside the old plum garden had fled a long time ago. Countless Go boards were lying on the ground, broken into pieces, and the Go pieces were scattered everywhere. Zen Master stood in the middle of the black and white Go pieces, stepping on a Go piece barefoot. He held a light mirror in his right hand and pointed it at the sky. The surface of the light mirror had many complicated patterns on it, and many scripts were carved on it. It was getting brighter and brighter, emitting countless rays of light that reached the sky. As the dark phoenix dashed wildly, the light mirror was flickering. Zen Master's face looked a bit pale as he said helplessly, "It's not enough to keep an eye on you, and now I have to keep an eye on your child." Why? The dark phoenix was fixed in the sky by Zen Master's light mirror. Lu Shui, of course, knew what to do. He punched the ground without hesitation, and the black and red demonic flames rose up as he escaped underground. Soon, he arrived in the west of the city. The great Grand Master of the mysterious dark sect was drinking wine in the pavilion in the west of the city. He held a small ceramic cup in his left hand and fiddled with the round, heavenly retrieval orb in his right hand, looking quite relaxed. As the demonic Grand Master of the deviant sects, it was a bit inconvenient for him to enter Zhaoga City. For the sake of safety, he had been guarding outside the city the entire day. The Zhongzhou school wouldn't care about what was going to happen today. The Aoyama sect would have a significant event that day, and the truly powerful figures in the cultivation circle were not here. Taiping Jinren, the Dark Phoenix, and him. With such a lineup, it was possible for them to take down Zhaoga City. There was nothing to worry about. There was a small river not far from the pavilion. The water suddenly boiled, and Lu Shui leaped out of the water and landed on the bank of the river. The great Grand Master of the mysterious dark sect found that the newcomer had an extraordinary cultivation state despite his young age. He was a bit surprised, but he wasn't worried at all. He put down the wine cup in his left hand and slapped at Lu Shui with his palm, ready to slap him to death. The violent wind whistled, and the pavilion collapsed. The sunlight in the sky dimmed abruptly. A black palm the size of a Buddhist hall appeared out of nowhere, heading toward Lu Shui's head. Lu Shui had come to the west of the city prepared. He didn't use any of the sword styles of the Aoyama sect, the Buddhist methods of the Guoqing Temple, or the secret methods of the Bloody Demon Church. He merely relied on the righteous energy of Yamatsai in his chest to wield the city guard pen. Whoosh! The sound was like a gust of wind blowing over the woods, or like a piece of paper being fanned by a naughty child. The water in the river shot up like a waterfall, and a rainbow emerged from the water droplets, heading toward the huge black palm. The huge black palm suddenly broke into pieces, and the rainbow created by the city guard pen also broke into pieces. The huge wind was still howling. Lu Shui's body flew toward Zhaoga City a few miles away like a kite with a broken string. A few seconds later, he crashed heavily against the city wall with a dull thud. Fortunately, he didn't suffer any irreparable injury. However, the great Grand Master of the mysterious dark sect was a formidable figure. The seemingly casual palm strike actually contained endless killing intent. The remaining power was endless, and a shapeless force continued to fly toward Lu Shui's body along with the wind. The willow trees on the city wall dimmed slightly, but the greenery became darker. A figure darted out from the willow and grabbed Lu Shui's left arm. Before the shapeless palm could land on him, the figure leaped 100 feet away. Boom! Even though the great formation of the royal palace had been activated and the city wall of Zhaoga City was as hard as metal and stone, a deep palm print was left on it. The surface of the bricks within 100 feet were all crushed into powder. If the palm had landed on Lu Shui, he would have been severely wounded even if he didn't die. He didn't die. The great Grand Master of the mysterious dark sect was a bit surprised. He took a look at the retrieved heavenly orb in his right hand and thought of the immortal's instruction. He swallowed the orb and arrived in front of the city wall in one step. The person who had darted out from the willow tree was affected by the palm wind. His conical hat was broken into pieces, exposing his green face. What a filial grandson! The great Grand Master of the mysterious dark sect said to Su Zai with a smile. Su Zai flashed a humble smile at the great Grand Master of the mysterious dark sect, saying, "Great Grand Master of the mysterious dark sect, please spare this humble one." The great Grand Master of the mysterious dark sect sneered. 2 jets of white devil fire shot out from his nostrils, shooting toward Lu Shui and Su Zai like sharp arrows. Su Zai turned around and fled after letting out a weird scream. Lu Shui took out a fan from his sleeve and waved it toward the white devil fire. The violent wind kicked up, and the willow tree branches were broken into pieces. The devil fire was slowed down by the wind. In the next moment, another rainbow shot out and created a passage in the white devil fire, heading toward the great Grand Master of the mysterious dark sect. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect waved his palm with a grave expression and shattered the rainbow, saying, "Kid, your cultivation state is not bad, but how come you have so many treasures?" Lu Shui remained silent. He adjusted his energy in secret, ready to employ the city guard pen again. After 100 years of hard work, his righteous energy of a gentleman had become extremely pure and powerful. It was no longer the same as before, when he could exhaust Zhen Yuan with only one stroke. A white hair suddenly drifted down in front of the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect. He touched the sparse hair on his head and shouted angrily, "Go to hell!" Along with this angry shout, dozens of hairs on his head stood up like thorns, and a gloomy but not gloomy and cold energy came out from his clothes. The energy condensed in the water and turned into countless ghost fires, heading toward Lu Shui at a crazy pace. There was a white, bony face in front of each ghost fire, looking extremely horrifying. It was the long-lost method of the mysterious dark sect, the 10,000 souls biting bones. Without hesitation, Lu Shui wielded the city guard pen again. If it was only the path of morality brought out by the city guard pen, it would not have been enough to stop such a large number of will-o'-the-wisps. However, what was surprising was that the straight lines drawn by the city guard pen formed a sword formation in front of Chaoga City. He employed the inherited heaven sword style with the city guard pen. Seeing this, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect had a slightly changed expression on his face as he commented, "Not bad." Even if it was not bad, it was merely not bad. No matter how talented Lu Shui was, how strange his encounters were, how many treasures he had, and how many sects he came from, he was no match for this deviant grandmaster, no matter how talented he was. A moment later, the inherited heaven sword formation drawn by the city guard pen couldn't hold on any longer. Ghosts cried in front of Zhaoga City, and heaven and earth changed color. Seeing those horrifying white, bony faces approaching, Lu Shui's face grew paler. It was because Zhen Yuan had consumed too much energy, not because he was scared. "Why can't you just run away?" With an angry yell, Su Zai returned to the front of the city wall. The white flame devil fire that had chased after him had been extinguished by some unknown method. It was then that the ghost fires in the sky of the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect arrived in front of the city wall. Su Zai let out a grunt, an eerie glow appearing on his green face, as if he had turned into a malicious ghost, biting at the ghost fires. In a few seconds, dozens of ghost fires had been swallowed by him. "Not bad, not bad. You are indeed the hope of our sect's revival." The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect laughed out loud, waving his sleeve slightly. He would look like an immortal if not for his spiky hair. As he waved his sleeve slightly, the ghost fires in the sky grew more formidable, and they were on the verge of swallowing Lu Shui and Su Zai. "Release your fire," said Lu Shui all of a sudden. Though the mysterious dark sect had the word "in" in its name, they practiced the magic method of the fire. Su Zai was born in the scorching sun gorge, and he was a rare genius of the mysterious dark sect, so he was good at this method. He didn't understand what Lu Shui meant, but he ignited his own ghost fires without hesitation. Lu Shui took out the fan again and fanned his burning palm. Boom! 2 seas of fire appeared in front of Zhaoga City. One sea of fire was full of white, bony faces. The other sea of fire was full of gloomy and cold wind. The nunnery hall was already shattered. The wooden bridge was also shattered. The plum forest was also shattered. Even the lake was a few feet shallower. It wasn't because the lake water had flowed into the ground, but because the water had been compressed into something heavier than ice. The great formation of the royal palace had been strengthened by a few major sects over 100 years, and was much more powerful than before. Kneeling on the ground, Gu Qing was covered in blood, and many of his bones were broken. He couldn't withstand the pressure of the great formation of the royal palace, and could die at any moment. Yet, he was still staring at Insan. He held the thoughtless sword rope in his right hand, and the sword of the universe in his left hand, supporting the sword formation of slaying fairies to prevent Insan from coming over. Sensing the commotion in the west of the city, San curled up the corners of his mouth, flashing an appreciative smile, saying, "They are indeed a group of lovely young people." His appreciation was genuine, and so was his evaluation of them as lovely. San liked these young people very much. These young people dared oppose such a powerful senior. Even though they would fail in the end, they were still formidable enough. Unfortunately, these young people were Jingjiu's disciples, not his. San sighed. He had finally moved his body. As he moved, there were many residual shadows, and his red cloth was as red as blood. The bloody shadows condensed into a sword shadow, which broke through the defense of the sword formation of slaying fairies soundlessly and pierced toward the center of Gu Qing's eyebrows. The sunset glow in Zhaoga City and Aoyama was fake that day, so it was hard to determine the time by the sunlight. It was unclear what time was exactly. Perhaps it was when Zhao Liu pointed her finger at Fang Jingtian, or when Gu Qing broke the seventh bone, or when Lu Shui spat out the third mouthful of blood, or when Xiao he had just finished shaving the last mouthful of tofu rice in her bowl. Jingjiu opened his eyes and woke up. Countless sword lights appeared in the deep end of his eyes, and then dispersed into specks of golden light, disappearing into the calm lake in the end. Jingjiu got up and walked toward the outside of the study room. After glancing at the spot where the begonia tree should be, he asked, "Where is it?" Everything happened so naturally, as if he hadn't slept for 100 years, and as if he had woken up a long time ago. The blue bird on the eaves said in the human language, "The old plum garden." A surprised scream suddenly burst out behind him. Jingjiu turned around and saw Xiaohe. He nodded to her, and then disappeared from the original spot. Xiaohe's hands loosened, and the rice bowl fell onto the stone steps and broke into pieces. Fortunately, the rice in the bowl was finished. Chapter 652. All of a sudden, a series of cracking noises broke out in the old plum garden. It sounded like a bowstring breaking or a leather bag filled with alcohol breaking. In fact, it was the sword string that broke, and the sword formation of slaying fairies was broken. A footprint suddenly appeared on the thin layer of water that had been pressed to the bottom of the lake and was as hard as a brick. The white cloth was tousled by the gentle breeze. Jingjiu appeared on the ruins of the nunnery hall and stood in front of Gu Qing. He reached out a finger and pointed at the sword formed by the bloody shadow. It was at this moment that the time in all of Chaotian had stopped. Only his finger and the sword formed by the bloody shadow were still moving forward. Huh! The bloody shadow turned into a solid substance. It was San's finger, the fingers of two people. 2 fingers. They had finally met. The sword wills of an unimaginable quantity and purity came out from the place where the 2 fingers met. They looked like the most magnificent waterfall in the world, like the rainstorm that year, and like the morning sun rising over the East Ocean. The sword of the universe, the lone sword and the first child sword since the countless sword wills enshrouding the ruins and flew up into the sky. The thoughtless sword grew redder, looking like a river of lava under the ground. It left Gu Qing's hand and whipped toward San's face like a whip. The bone flute rose up against the wind, making a whimpering sound. The whip dropped down like a dead snake. Jingjiu grabbed Gu Qing with his left hand and threw him to a distant place. Along with a whistling sound, Gu Qing turned into a dark speck and landed in the royal palace a few miles away, creating a large pit in the square. Sensing that the sword formation of slaying fairies had been seized, Ping Yongka opened his eyes in bewilderment and spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. Gu Qing was lying at the bottom of the pit, covered in blood. The great formation of the royal palace had been seized by Jingjiu. Ah Piao screamed and disappeared from the stone steps in front of the grand hall. She came to the center of the square in an instant, but she didn't know whom she should save first. The dark phoenix in the sky sensed the change in the energy of heaven and earth and became alarmed. He uttered a violent shriek, and the tail feathers of more than 100 feet long turned into a sword again. The Dark Phoenix flew toward the old plum garden after breaking the restraint of Zen Master's light mirror by force. On the ruins of the old plum garden, Jingjiu was holding the thoughtless sword rope in his left hand, while Insan was holding the bone flute in his right hand. The invisible small swords were swimming around them, extremely agile. The two looked at each other in silence. For experts of their level, if they wanted to, they could exchange countless pieces of information with just a glance. Many years ago, Jingjiu and the Queen of the Snowy Kingdom had a similar conversation in the Snowland, and Jingjiu had a long and important conversation with Nanchu before his death. What would they talk about today? You're so lucky. It's patience. I've waited for you for 17 years. No wonder you woke up at this time. From the deduction, this doesn't make sense. Either you wake up early or you don't. That's why I'm here this time. You're always calculating, but you don't realize that there are many things you can't figure out. For instance, Gu Qing is not afraid of death or something else. For instance, I failed to ascend, but I'm still alive. But you're indeed sleeping. Otherwise, how could you deceive me? Yes, I've slept for 17 years. If I don't have a suitable opportunity, I might keep sleeping. Opportunity, the trigger of the event. I'm curious. I'll wake up when you're ready to exert the full strength of the total transformation and come to this human world. The conversation took place in the spiritual awareness. Meanwhile, the fight that had started again after hundreds of years was still going on. It was not difficult for them to do two things at the same time, or even 100 things at the same time. Jingjiu willed it. The sword of the universe, the first child sword, and the lone sword struck down again. Insan willed it. The small sword broke into pieces as it shot up into the air. A drop of blood dripped down from the place where the two fingers met. It was extremely red, devoid of any impurities. It was Insan's blood. The bone flute shot up into the air. The whimpering sound rang out. Insan's left arm was cut off, turning into ashes instantly. Jingjiu waved his fingers again. Insan disappeared from the original spot, his red clothes shedding. A small red bird flew up from the ruins, evading the sword formation and heading to the high sky. The red bird's feathers were a bit mottled because they were stained with blood. Jingjiu arrived in the sky as well. The red bird flapped its wings. It was the flapping of the wings of the rosefinch. Countless sword wills broke through the ocean of clouds, bringing down countless raindrops. The great formation of the royal palace suddenly broke apart. Zhaoga City was enshrouded in the rain. The red bird disappeared without a trace. Jingjiu turned around and looked at the ground, disappearing again. In the next moment, he arrived outside the western part of the city. The ghostly cries could be heard outside the city wall, and the gloomy wind dispersed. Lu Shui and Su Zai stood against the city wall, using the last bit of Zhen Yuan to resist the ghostly flames in the sky. A horrifying bloody mouth suddenly appeared in the ghostly flames in the sky, ready to swallow them up. It was then that Jingjiu arrived in the sky. He turned into a flash of sword light and entered the wide mouth. The ghostly flames in the sky vanished instantly, and the green willows regained their vitality. Standing on the surface of the river, the expression on the face of the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect changed abruptly. His body shrank at an unimaginable speed, and his demonic body became even more indestructible. The chest of the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect bulged slightly, and then broke open, a few drops of thick ink-like blood splashing out. Jingjiu landed on the ground, holding the heavenly retrieval orb in his hand, the surface of which was stained with blood. The dark phoenix arrived amid the drizzle, whistling shrilly. The feathers on his tail were like a sword, drawing a straight and deep mark on the ground. Jingjiu flicked his fingers in the air, and countless sword wills and the 3 swords of the sword of the universe shot toward the sky. Crack! The dark phoenix had a few wounds on his body. He didn't dare stay any longer. He reached out his sharp claws and grabbed the shoulders of the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect, flying toward the distance with him. The angry and painful voice of the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect echoed in the sky above Zhaoga City. I'll kill him. I can still fight. I swallowed him by accident. Otherwise, he wouldn't be a match for me. Seeing the dark phoenix disappearing into the horizon, Jing Jiao remained silent, not pursuing the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark phoenix. In the next moment, his body wobbled a few times, a few tears appearing on his white cloth. Young master! Lu Shui rushed over and held Jing Jiao up hastily, regardless of his own wound. Jing Jiao waved his hand to indicate that he was all right. A thin black feather a few feet long drifted down from the sky and landed by his feet. Jing Jiao waved his hand to bring the black feather back into the black feather. Seeing this, Lu Shui was certain that Jing Jiao was all right and felt relieved. He couldn't suppress his wound any longer and knelt down on the ground. Suzai was quite familiar with the magic methods of the mysterious dark sect, and his cultivation state was not as high as Lu Shui's, so his wound was much lighter. He walked to the front of Jing Jiao and bowed to the ground. He had been active in the West Ocean over the last few years. He had developed quite well by relying on the secret support of the imperial court and some forces of the Aoyama sect. Though he didn't dare carry the banner of the mysterious dark sect again, he had recruited many disciples. He didn't know why Tong Yin asked him to come to Xiaoga City, and he didn't dare inquire about it after witnessing so many things that day. He was about to leave after bowing to Jing Jiao. "You are not allowed to tell Tong Yin if you have guessed anything," Jing Jiao suddenly said. Suzai responded reverently and left through the ground. The clouds in the sky were very faint to begin with, but the rainwater was forced out by the sword wills of Jing Jiao and Yin San. They had no source, so they had gradually stopped falling. The sword wills coming out from the royal palace had stopped a long time ago. The sunlight in the sky was no longer cut off, and the color of the sunlight grew lighter and lighter. It was no longer as beautiful as the sunset, but it looked more like the spring day. Jing Jiao looked at Xiaoga City and asked, "Has it really been 100 years?" "Yes, young master," Lu Shui replied. Jing Jiao took out a bone flute from his sleeve. He looked at it in silence for a while, and then brought it to his lips and played a tune. There was a blood-red line in the middle of the bone flute. As Jing Jiao played the flute, the color of the blood-red line grew fainter and fainter, and the color of the bone became as white as jade. Many wildflowers suddenly grew under the city walls of Xiaoga City. A spring rain had fallen earlier. The sunlight was as bright as the morning. Countless sword marks appeared in the blue sky, spreading out in all directions. This was the sign of the birth of a powerful being in heaven and earth. "Here you go." Jing Jiao tossed the bone flute to Lu Shui. Lu Shui took the bone flute and hit it carefully, feeling shocked inside. What shocked him was not that the bone flute of Taiping Zhenren was taken by his young master, or that his young master gave the bone flute to him, or that his young master had broken through the heavenly arrival state after sleeping for 100 years. But when did his young master learn to play the flute? In the 6th volume, The End of 1,000 Autumns. Chapter 653. Inscription. Mesmerizing attraction. Jin Dynasty. Wang Zhe chased by chance, no hindrance. Looking at Jinbo Qingdai alone. Looking back, he suddenly saw outside the wild forest a pile of skeletons lying in the green sand. Who was the leader of the lonely competition? Kong Bai's eyes were filled with dust. Rain and wind blew. Sun and stars shined. Job transfer increases, heavy burdens. Foreign land. Where are the guests? In what era? What can you do when encountering the mesmerizing attraction? Wang Zhe seems to be Wang Chongyang. It was quiet on the top of Tianguang Peak. The clouds, drifting to other peaks, gathered again. They were as pale as Zhao Leiyu's face. She was defeated by Fang Jingtian's sword. To be exact, Fang Jingtian didn't draw his sword, because she didn't draw her sword either. No one thought Zhao Leiyu was overconfident, and no one dared to look down on her. Even without the thoughtless sword, she still displayed a powerful and formidable cultivation in swordsmanship. That was why the acquired shapeless sword was formidable. Any cultivator in the peak of the Broken Sea state was no match for her at that moment. The problem was that Fang Jingtian was a figure in the reaching heaven state. He had transcended the mortal world and stood above the sea of clouds. There weren't many bloodstains on the peak, because Zhao Liu had lost too much blood in the snowland a few days ago, and Fang Jingtian couldn't fight with all his strength. First of all, it was because of his identity and status. Second of all, the most important reason was there was a pair of eyes on him on Bihu Peak. That pair of eyes was cold, but once they went crazy, they would be crazy and bloodthirsty. In fact, most of the bloodstains on the ground belonged to Zhuo Ruzhui. He pulled out his sword before Zhao Liu could do anything. The swallowing boat's sword was indeed powerful, and his state was indeed superior to other cultivators of his generation. But he was defeated more decisively than Zhao Liu, or he admitted defeat more decisively. It wasn't a shame that he couldn't defeat a figure like Fang Jingtian. The small injuries he had suffered were just some light punishments imposed on him by Fang Jingtian. But at this time, he acted as if he was seriously injured and on the verge of death. He leaned in Guan Nanshan's arms and kept screaming. Even Kang Nyang couldn't stand it anymore. Was this the end? Of course not. Yuan Chu had already summoned the strange gray, twisted sword with a strange appearance and a reflective crystal on its surface. Of course, he would lose, but then there would be junior sister Yushan, elder Qiyin, Lei Il Kyung, Yao Songshan, and countless other young disciples who still remembered Jingjiao. Thinking about what would happen next, he felt that it was extremely beautiful. Tong Yin was right. Fang Jingtian's intentions were not righteous. He needed to convince the masses he would not dare to kill people at will. Even if I can't beat you, can I drag you down? But it was a pity that little brother, Ah Piao, and senior brother Gu Qing were not here. Otherwise, it would be a lively day. As he was thinking about these things, Yuan Chu had already arrived at the scene. He bowed respectfully to Fang Jingtian and said, "This disciple." According to Tong Yan's plan, he should say a long speech at this moment, vaguely revealing his identity as a disciple of the Yuan clan of Lelong County, and then say something else. But unexpectedly, no one heard what he said next, and it was drowned in a wave of exclamations. Yuan Chu was a bit surprised. He followed the crowd's line of sight to look at the sky, and was also startled. The sea of clouds between the 9 peaks of Aoyama was calm, like a white woolen carpet. But in the real world outside the great Aoyama formation, there were still clouds moving along with the wind. Those clouds were gradually parting, revealing the sky behind them, which looked like dozens of blue ruts, leading to an unknown place. Such a scene was definitely not a natural creation of heaven and earth. So where did the mighty force come from? People looked at the strange phenomenon in the sky in astonishment and talked among themselves. What's going on? Is the spiritual boat of a sect passing by? Impossible. No spiritual boat can travel so fast in the world. Is this a sign? Fang Jingtian's silver eyebrows fluttered slightly, and Jinren looked baffled. The curtain of the small green curtained sedan fluttered without any wind. More and more people were getting close to the truth. Such a strange phenomenon was probably a sign that a great figure was born in heaven and earth. The abnormal sign of heaven and earth originated from the north. Was it possible that an important figure of the center sect had entered the Deshang state? Thinking of this possibility, the disciples of Aoyama looked grim. No, this is a sword, Elder Mochi said suddenly. The others were even more astonished, thinking that the Western Sea Sword School had been destroyed and the No Mercy sect had sealed off their mountains. There were few sects in the world that used swords, and even fewer sects could produce great figures in the heavenly arrival realm. Who in Aoyama's sect could be in the north? Could it be senior brother Gu Qing? Someone asked doubtfully. Impossible. Zhuo Ruzhui had forgotten to cry out in pain. He said in a mocking tone, with his talent, it's impossible even if he cultivates for another 300 years. While the others were talking about it, the ruts in the ocean of clouds became wider, and the energy coming out from them became clearer and clearer. Zhuo Ruzhui's expression changed slightly as he thought of a possibility. Then, more and more people thought of it. All of a sudden, the ever-present fog on Yunxing Peak disappeared without a trace. Countless swords and sword embryos appeared on the cliffs and bowed slightly toward the distant north. More than 100 years ago, when the will of Lucy I was read out in Aoyama, a similar scene had happened. However, the scene today was even more magnificent than that. This scene proved everyone's conjecture. Everyone was incomparably shocked. Did the immortal sect master wake up in Xiaoga City? No. Not only did he wake up, but he also entered the heavenly arrival realm. Lei Il-kyung, Yao Song's-han, and other disciples of Aoyama were pleasantly surprised, and they bowed to the distant north in the direction of Xiaoga City. In the next moment, more and more disciples of Aoyama knelt down. The ruts in the ocean of clouds turned out to be the marks left by the swords. The shock didn't end there. Innumerable more subtle but equally profound sword wills emerged from the peaks of Aoyama, heading toward the sky. The crowd turned around in shock and found that those subtle sword wills came from Qingrong Peak. Senior Master Mei Li's eyes were beaming, her face slightly red, and she was very excited. Those young girls jumped up happily, yelling something. Those subtle sword wills arrived in the high sky and connected with the sword wills coming from the north, forming a large net that enveloped the whole of Aoyama. These were the sword strings of the endless sword style. Looking in the direction of Qingrong Peak, Fang Jingtian said, with a complicated expression, "Congratulations, young sister." The sword strings quivered slightly, giving off a crisp and moving sound like the sound of a sword. It was because someone had landed on them. Nan Wang walked over from the direction of Qingrong Peak. She stepped on the sword strings barefoot, the silvery bells ringing along with her. She didn't look like an otherworldly being, but more like a playful little girl. The sword strings quivered randomly, so it was impossible to determine where they were. So was her body. She was sometimes on the peak top a few miles away, and sometimes on top of the clouds, as if she were drunk. This was the heavenly arrival state. Huh! She landed on the top of Tianguang Peak. She lifted her small face slightly and asked Fang Jingtian, "Big brother, do you still want to compete for the position of the sect master?" It was quiet on the peak top. Everybody was waiting for Fang Jingtian's answer, but they had already guessed his answer. Nan Wang had just broken through the state, so she was no match for him. However, that person had already woken up and reached the highest point in the sky with one step. The folded plum blossom formed by the sword wills appeared in the sky again. Fang Jingtian had returned to Shilai Peak. Looking at the dozens of sword lights remaining in the sky, Nan Wang curled his lips and turned to Zhao Liu, asking, "Is it worth it? For such a man?" Zhuo Rizhui thought that he was the first one to strike, but he didn't know that Zhao Liu was determined to prevent Fang Jingtian from becoming the sect master of Aoyama, even at the cost of her own life. Nan Wang was well aware of this, which was why he raised the question. Zhao Liu said, "He is a man in your eyes, but he is a sword in someone else's eyes, but he is him in my eyes." Zhuo Rizhui was even more confused about what they were talking about. So he said to Nan Wang, "Senior Master Zhao, if you had come out earlier, we wouldn't have been wounded so badly. You people want to use me as you wish." Nan Wang sneered and walked to the cliff's edge with her hands folded behind her back, looking in the direction of Xiaoga City in the distant ocean of clouds. If Jing Jiu hadn't woken up all of a sudden and reached the heavenly arrival state, she wouldn't have wanted to lower her head to him, and it would have taken her decades to reach the heavenly arrival state. Zhao Liu had a general understanding of the cause and effect, but she didn't say anything. The strange phenomena occurred when heaven and earth were born, together with the commotion in the old plum garden, the royal palace, and outside the western city wall. The whole of Xiaoga City was shocked. The people crowded onto the streets, discussing something excitedly while looking at the ocean of clouds that had been separated. Jing Jiu led Lu Shui into Xiaoga City, appearing in front of everyone. Seeing that beautiful face, the populace of Xiaoga City guessed his identity. They parted like the tide, making way for him on the street. Their gazes were full of awe and curiosity, and many of them had knelt down and kowtowed to him. Jing Jiu hadn't been seen in the human world for 100 years, but the legend was still there. Following by Jing Jiu's side, Lu Shui could vaguely guess what was going on, feeling a bit nervous. The spring rain had washed away the dust in Zhaoga City, and the dark eaves of Taichung Temple had regained some vitality, pointing out the direction more conspicuously. Walking toward Taichung Temple, it didn't take long for the two of them to arrive at the Jing house. This place was the forbidden area of Zhaoga City. The populace who followed them here were blocked outside by the formation, so the streets were much quieter now. Looking at the Buddhist hall on the other side of the street, Jing Jiu said, "Thank you for your hard work." Sitting in the deep end of the Buddhist hall, Zen master grabbed the wooden stick in front of him and told the monks to clean it up, saying, "Let's go to White Town as soon as possible. I don't want to see him." Chapter 654. Jing Jiu led Lu Shui into the courtyard house, arriving in the courtyard where the begonia tree should have been. Xiao was sweeping the broken porcelain pieces on the ground. Seeing the two of them, she let out a surprised cry, and then came back to her senses and bowed to them hastily. Lu Shui walked over and knelt down beside her, bowing to her reverently. "Is this a marriage?" asked Jing Jiu. Lu Shui thought that it was fine if Jing Jiu thought so. The door of the courtyard opened slightly, and Jing Li walked in hurriedly. He knelt down on the ground with a pa sound, his shoulders trembling slightly, but he couldn't make a sound. Looking at this man with white hair on his temples and an obvious old age, Jing Jiu sighed in his mind. In this life, his name was Jing Jiu. The Jing house, not far from Taichung Temple, was regarded by him as his home. It was here that he asked Gu Qing to send him home before he fell asleep. He had indeed regarded Jing Li as his nephew. He asked Master White Ghost, the guard of Aoyama, to teach him, and Gu Qing to teach him the sword work. Even if Jing Li's talent was ordinary, he shouldn't have such a low cultivation state and become so old at the age of 100. This indicated that Jing Li didn't cultivate diligently. The reason he didn't cultivate diligently was that his heart was as dead as a doornail. Jing Jiu didn't say anything. He went to the study room after shooting 2 glances at Jing Li in silence. The Grandmaster of the Jing family passed away many years ago, and so did Jing Shang and his wife 30 years ago. Jing Li's wife was not in good health, and the two of them had no children. After Jing Li's wife passed away a few years ago, he became what he is now, said Lu Shui sentimentally. "He's too sentimental. He's not suitable for cultivation. What about your family?" asked Jing Jiu. Lu Shui fell silent. "Xiao," he said in a low voice uneasily. "The 2 elders in the village passed away many years ago, and so did their children." This was the story of the Lu family in that small village. 100 years was nothing more than a nap for a cultivation practitioner like Jing Jiu, but it was the difference between life and death for mortals. It was said that life was but a dream, and it was indeed so. All these years, Lu Shui had been guarding the Jing house. He wanted to take care of him, but also because there was nothing in the world that he needed to worry about. Jing Jiu raised his right hand. Lu Shui lowered his head. "Touch." Xiao didn't dare to have any feelings of jealousy anymore. She just stood obediently at the side. Jing Jiu glanced at her and thought of her kind in the imperial palace. He slightly raised his eyebrows. Back in the Sea God Temple outside Haizhou City, Xiaohe's chest was pierced by the lone sword. Since then, she had been extremely afraid of Jing Jiu. Seeing him raise his eyebrows, she was so scared that her legs went soft and she knelt down, although she didn't know why. "It's none of your business." Jing Jiu motioned for Xiaohe to stand up and said to Lu Shui, "Bu Xiao should be here soon. You have to go back." Lu Shui had experienced many parting of life and death, but he still couldn't get used to it. He was especially sensitive to the words soon and soon. His face suddenly turned pale. "Don't worry," said Jing Jiu. "It's a good thing." Lu Shui understood what Jing Jiu meant, feeling pleasantly surprised. "I'll go back as soon as possible," he said. If it were Gu Qing, Yuan Chu, or Zhua Ruzhui, Jing Jiu wouldn't leave as soon as he woke up. However, Jing Jiu had always been a straightforward person. Now that his young master wanted him to go back to Yamatai, he packed up his luggage and left Zhaoga City with Xiao He. As for the need to spend more time together to deepen the bond and affection, it was unnecessary for him and his young master to have such an empty relationship. With a flutter, the green bird landed on the windowsill and looked into the courtyard. Jing Jiu's line of sight followed it. It was unclear where the begonia tree had gone. Jing Li was still drinking wine. Prime Minister Qin was still alive, but that little girl who could only make cold tea had gone far away. This was the sufferings of mortals. Jing Jiu came to the street. The sceneries on the street were completely different from 100 years ago. The other buildings were all new, to say nothing of the Buddhist hall that had been moved here from the Net Perception Temple. Of course, they were also old now. The words "things remain the same, but the people have changed" would have a great impact on the minds of the mortals, but the cultivation practitioners were used to it. If they came to the human world, Jing Jiu walked through the deserted street and climbed up the stairs. He entered the Buddhist hall and came to the back hall under the guidance of the receptionist monk, where he saw a Zen master. The spring breeze caressed the willow branches, bringing with it the catkins. Though it was beautiful, it was a bit annoying. This was probably the feeling Zen master had toward Jing Jiu. The bell rang loudly. The wind chimes tinkled. 2 cups of weak tea. 2 futons. Zen master picked his feet and sniffed, saying, "You're really lucky." Insen had said the same thing in the old plum garden. What he said was that Jing Jiu could wake up, and also that he could break through the heavenly arrival state. It was well known that Jing Jiu was reborn by means of the all in one-turn sword in this life, and what he cultivated was not a regular cultivation method. It was very fast for him to break through the states in the early stage, but it was more difficult for him to do so in the later stages. First of all, he would encounter the problem of the sword ghost when he entered the free travel state. He sneaked into the fiend prison and discussed it with the king of the underworld for many years, and he had finally solved this problem by means of the underworld fairy sword. After he entered the broken sea state, he would face a more troublesome problem, which was that he needed more spiritual energy of heaven and earth than regular human cultivation practitioners. It wasn't just an ordinary amount, it was a massive amount. Back when he broke through the broken sea state on Bihu Peak, he relied on the thunder and lightning drawn by the great formation of Aoyama to barely have enough energy. If he wanted to break through the heavenly arrival state, he would have to go deep into the thunder region to absorb enough energy, and he might not even be able to do it. Lueda had been worried about this back then. Unexpectedly, Jing Jiu killed the replica of the fairy lady by Run in the Battle of Zhaoga City and seized all the fairy energy in the fairy book, and he successfully entered the heavenly arrival state by virtue of the fairy energy. There were only a few fairy books in the world, and they were all under the control of the Zhongzhou school, but Jing Jiu had used 2 of them. Zen Master and Yin San were right. Jing Jiu was indeed lucky. But was it really just luck? The layer of dark cloud enshrouding Zhaoga City, tens of thousands of swords descending from the sky, the replica of the fairy lady emitting a golden glow, the round windows and the lake at the 3,000 nunnery, the blocking of his palms strike toward Lien Sanyue, and the light specks scattered like butterflies in his chest. Jing Jiu closed his eyes and opened them slowly after a long while, saying, "Maybe." Zen Master knew what Jing Jiu was thinking about. "What are you going to do next?" he asked after a moment of silence. "I want to solve the problem of Yuan Qijing," said Jing Jiu. The expression on Zen Master's face changed slightly as he said, "The reason I didn't want to see you was because I knew you would say this. I really can't do it, and nobody can. You shouldn't be too persistent." After a moment of silence, Jing Jiu didn't continue this topic. "I'll solve the problem of Taiping first, and then the problem of the Zhongzhou school. After that, I'll focus on my cultivation." What he said was common and nonchalant, like eating a bowl of white rice porridge at noon and a hot pot at night. But how could these 2 problems be solved so easily? Zen Master said, "It's your problem whether it's Taiping or the Zhongzhou school. But what about your cultivation?" "I'll go out when it's time," said Jing Jiu. Zen Master said, "The problem is, how can you go out? One fairy book can help you reach the heavenly arrival state. How much energy of heaven and earth do you need to ascend? It's useless even if the Zhongzhou school gives you the last 2 fairy books, and it's useless even if you dare stay in the Thunder region for 10 years. The imperial city gate slowly opened, and suddenly there was a cry of surprise. Gu Pan frowned slightly and asked in a deep voice, "What happened?" A person landed in front of the imperial city after the morning sunlight was slightly disturbed. He looked like a ferryman in a painting, his white cloth ruffling. Gu Pan bowed to the ground hastily with a grave expression, saying, "Greetings, immortal sect master." Those subordinates and guards had guessed the identity of the newcomer. They knelt down on the ground nervously and excitedly. Jingjiu didn't pay any attention to them. He walked toward the imperial palace and arrived in the middle of the square in a few moments. It was evident that some of the green stone slabs had been repaired recently. They should be where the deep pit made by Gu Qing was. The marks left by Ko Qing Tong, the immortal Tan, Lin Sanyue, by Run and Jingjiu 100 years ago had disappeared without a trace. Standing in the morning sunlight, Jingjiu thought of the fresh blood and corpses scattered all over the square, and those swords stuck in the pools of blood and corpses like weeds, remaining silent for a while. The Battle of Zhaoga City had taken place 100 years ago for the people in the world, but it was merely 1 year ago for him. The scene of her leaving seemed to be still in his mind. Jingjiu glanced at the side hall with the wind and snow falling on it in silence, and then he went to the grand hall. Jingyao, Ping Yongka, and Apyao came to the grand hall after hearing the commotion and bowed to Jingjiu. "Master, greetings, teacher." "Greetings, granduncle." Gu Qing walked into the grand hall with the help of Jingjiu. He knelt down before Jingjiu, saying nothing with his head lowered. Jingjiu waved his hand to signal for Jingyao and the other 2 to leave. "Say something," he said to Gu Qing. Gu Qing felt extremely ashamed as he said in a trembling voice, "This disciple is so sorry, master." "What are you sorry about?" asked Jingjiu. "This disciple was seduced by the beauty. No, this disciple's Tao heart was not calm, and I was greedy for the beauty. I seduced the Empress Dowager. This is an unforgivable sin." Having said this, Gu Qing calmed down. He told Jingjiu everything about how he and Empress who had started. He didn't conceal anything, except for some details. Of course, he didn't forget to take the responsibility himself. Jingjiu didn't respond to him, asking, "Anything else?" Gu Qing was taken aback, thinking that he had done many other unclean things in addition to this matter. As such, he told Jingjiu about the major events that had taken place in the imperial court in the last 100 years. In all these events, he was the dark hand hiding behind the scenes, and he had played many tricks. His actions couldn't be considered as honorable. Before Jingjiu could finish his story, Jingjiu raised his hand to signal for him to stop talking, saying, "You have told me all these things, so you don't need to repeat them." Gu Qing was taken aback for a moment before he understood what was going on. His face couldn't help but turn even paler, and besides feeling ashamed, there was also a great deal of awkwardness. In the last 100 years, he had used all methods in the imperial court and purged many officials. Also, the matter with Empress who had brought him a great deal of pressure. He couldn't tell anyone about these things, so every night when he returned to the Jing house, he would tell his master about them in detail. "You have been awake all this time?" he asked in surprise. Jingjiu said, "I haven't been awake, but I can hear." Gu Qing didn't quite understand what kind of state it was. Then he thought sadly that his master knew what he had done, and he certainly didn't like him for being so scheming. Otherwise, why would he enter the palace so many days later? Jingjiu knew what he was thinking and said, "Many years ago, on the first day you arrived at Shima Peak, I told you that you were rather scheming, but I didn't like or dislike it." Gu Qing was taken aback, thinking what did this mean? Jingjiu continued, "But it is foolish of you to want to die when encountering such a trivial matter. Can death solve the problem? I informed Zen Master ahead of time and also reported it to Master Yuan. If something really happened to Master Taiping, halfway through his sentence, Gu Qing suddenly realized something was wrong. What had his master just said? Encountering such a trivial matter? His affair with the Empress Dowager had been known by Master Taiping, and he had used it to force him to harm Aoyama. Was this still a trivial matter? With 70% confusion, 20% confusion, and 10% expectation, he asked, You don't think that I have done wrong in this matter? I have said that as long as one can bear the consequences of any choice, there is no right or wrong. Jingjiu said, Moreover, there is no right or wrong in the affair between a man and a woman. I just think it is troublesome. You can't learn from me. Following your heart is also the way. This sounded clever, but it was actually very simple. What he wanted to express was that this was your own choice. You can die for it. I will think you are stupid, but I will not think you are wrong. Moreover, if I like you, then I like you. Even if I think you are wrong, so what? Even if the whole world thinks you are wrong, so what? You are not even afraid of death, so why care about this? This is really stupid. Among all the people on Shinma Peak, Gu Qing was not the one who could understand Jing Jiu's meaning the fastest, nor was he the one who was closest to him, but he was the one who could grasp his meaning the most accurately and comprehensively. Therefore, he clearly understood the hidden meaning in Jing Jiu's words without missing anything. He could not help but be silent for a long time. Even though he was happy, he also felt great pressure. But if this matter is known by the world, it will inevitably lead to many troubles. The retrieved heavenly orb is with me. Master, you did not see it, did you? Gu Qing understood his meaning and quickly changed the topic, saying, But this matter will eventually spread out. Jing Jiu said, If someone guessed it, it is because you are not capable enough. If you're not capable enough, why do you still do this? Gu Qing felt a little awkward, but he still had to say, Even if I can hide it from the world, I can't always hide it from Jintao. This matter is unfair to her. If you don't want trouble, then hide it. It will be best if you can hide it until you die or ascend. Jingjiu said expressionlessly, If you can't do it, just tell her directly and let her choose. Letting Jintao choose was naturally letting her choose whether or not she wanted Gu Qing, or whether or not she could accept him. Normally speaking, that was impossible. So in the end, it was still Gu Qing's turn to make a choice. Gu Qing was silent for a long time, then said, Even if I choose this side, I can't be with her. Jingjiu asked, Where are you right now? Gu Qing understood what he meant. His eyes gradually calmed down, and his expression gradually became firm. He and Empress, who were in the palace, they were already together. That was together. Blindfolding his eyes and letting the world guess. Was this Jing Jiu's solution? Gu Qing had missed a possibility, but Empress, who would not forget it. Knowing that the moment Jing Jiu came to the palace, she drove all the eunuchs and palace maids out and knelt in the hall, waiting for him to come and kill her. Tonight, the TV series The Full-Time Master will be broadcast on Tencent Video. Everyone, go and watch it after reading this chapter. More importantly, I wish Butterfly's daughter a happy birthday. Chapter 656. A breeze came in from the window and ruffled the corners of his white robe. Jingjiu looked down at her and said, You are very smart. Empress, who lowered her head and said nothing. Jingjiu sat down on the chair and looked at the distance between the soft couch and him. He slightly raised his eyebrows and said, Yes, killing you is the simplest solution, but I won't do it because His Majesty asked me to do it before he left. Empress, who couldn't stand it anymore. She raised her head and looked at him in confusion. What do you mean by that? Do you mean, before His Majesty left, he thought that I couldn't protect him? In his eyes, I would definitely cause trouble in the court. So he asked you to spare my life? The more she thought about it, the sadder she felt. She said with tears in her eyes, Although I am a vixen, I am not that kind of person. How could His Majesty think of me like that? Jingjiu was silent for a while, and then said, Yes, you are not that kind of person, so he didn't mean it. Empress, who opened her big and confused eyes and asked, Then why did His Majesty ask you to do it in advance? Vixens are affectionate and deep. His Majesty was worried that after his death, you would be too sad to get over it and might even follow him. Jingjiu looked at her calmly and said, "This is not what he wanted to see. He wanted you to live happily." Empress Hu looked at him in a daze, not understanding what he meant. More than 100 years ago, when His Majesty the Emperor left the world, she was indeed extremely sad. No one knew, not even Jing Yao and Gu Qing, that many nights she almost followed the emperor. Jing Jiu said, many years ago, he had Gu Qing come to the palace to teach Jing Yao. He was preparing in advance because he knew what kind of man you would like. Is it the best way to forget him and your pain to fall in love with someone else? Empress Hu fell to the ground with a pale face. So don't disappoint his efforts and live happily. After saying this, Jing Jiu picked up the teacup on the table and took a sip before leaving the palace. Empress Hu sat on the ground. She felt guilty and happy at the same time. She missed him and felt sad at the same time. Her tears kept flowing. After dealing with these boring things, Jing Jiu went to the side hall. It was not because the things here were not important, but because he did not want to come. The temperature in that side hall was extremely low, and the pillars and windows were covered in frost. No matter how exquisite the carvings were, they were covered in frost and snow, and no matter how exquisite the carvings were, they were no longer beautiful. A gust of wind and snow appeared out of nowhere in the hall, bringing with it a bone-piercing chill as it fell toward the ground. Yuan Qijing was dressed in black. He sat cross-legged under the snowstorm. He had been sitting there for 100 years. The wind and snow fell on his body and disappeared instantly. He was extremely thin and no longer as tall as before. His heavily damaged black clothes fluttered in the wind. Walking into this side hall, Jing Jiu felt as if he had walked into the manor cave on the Shangda Peak. He had lived on the Shangda Peak for hundreds of years, but he still disliked the cold and damp feeling there. He disliked this side hall even more that day. "You've changed." Yuan Qijing opened his eyes and said to Jing Jiu with an indifferent expression, "If it were before, you would have killed that vixen with one swing of your sword, no matter what the emperor had told you." Jing Jiu had said that Zhao Liu's style of killing the vixen with one swing of her sword was similar to his own. It was true. Yuan Qijing and Lu Xi had seen such a scene many times. Back when he was the immortal Jingyang, he had never paid attention to the affairs of Aoyama. It was because he didn't like trouble. Killing people was actually a pleasure, because it was the simplest and fastest way to solve the problem. It seemed that the departure of Lu Xi and Lien Sanyue had influenced and changed him a little bit. "You've also changed. You've become thinner and uglier." Jing Jiu sat down in front of Yuan Qijing and looked at his skinny face. "Thank you for your hard work," he said after a moment of silence. Jing Jiu had told Zhao Liu many years ago that Yuan Qijing and Lu Xi had only a few decades left in their lives. According to the time limit, Yuan Qijing should have passed away a long time ago. The reason he was still alive was that he had used the secret method of Aoyama to prolong his life. Tai Lu had used this secret method to prolong his life in the sword jail until 100 years ago. This method of prolonging one's life was not the true method of prolonging one's life. It was because the cultivation practitioners would lose all their senses after using this secret method, and they would have to endure innumerable conflicts in their spiritual souls, which was more painful than being a dead person. Living like this was more horrible than death. If Tai Lu didn't hate Taiping and Jingyang so much, he wouldn't have used this method. The reason Yuan Qijing used this secret method to prolong his life was not because he was afraid of death, but because Jing Jiu was still in a deep sleep and Zhaoge City needed to be guarded by him. "If I can't even endure this pain, why should I cultivate?" said Yuan Qijing expressionlessly. Jing Jiu said, "Back when we played mahjong, you didn't say this. I remember that you said it didn't matter whether you won or lost. It was more important to be happy during the process." Yuan Qijing said, "You and I are not good at chatting like Lu Xi. It's better to shut up. Do you want to eat hot pot?" asked Jing Jiu. Yuan Qijing said, "I won't leave until one day later. You go and do what you need to do." Jing Jiu said, "I've finished what I need to do. It had been quite a few days since spring." He had been gazing at the stars in the Zhao garden, but he didn't want to enter the royal palace. It had nothing to do with what Gu Qing thought. He didn't want to enter the royal palace because he knew that Yuan Shijing would wake up and leave once he entered the royal palace. Two people who know how to play mahjong, he suddenly turned his head and said to the outside of the grand hall, must be good players. His voice wasn't loud, but it echoed in the royal palace like the ringing of a bell. It even reached Zhaoga City, startling many residents and causing many misunderstandings. As soon as Jing Jiu yelled, the whole of Zhaoga City was in chaos. The imperial court soon elected a few representatives led by Grand Scholar Hu, but they were all vetoed by Gu Qing without hesitation. Being good at playing mahjong was only one aspect. The key was who the players were. Jing Jiu was certain that his master didn't want to face these white-haired old men, and he couldn't give such an opportunity to others. It didn't take long before Empress Hu walked into the side hall shyly. She bowed to Jing Jiu and Yuan Shijing, saying, I'm good at playing mahjong. In the next moment, Kei Nyang's surprised and bewildered voice broke out at the gate of the grand hall. Teacher, it turns out that you are here. Back in spring, the whole of Chaotian had seen the dozens of ruts in the ocean of clouds. Knowing that Jing Jiu had woken up, Zhao Leiyu remained calm, and Yuan Chu had no choice but to remain calm. Kei Nyang came to Zhaoga City directly, but she didn't know where he was. She was replaying the Go game between her teacher and Tong Yin on the chessboard mountain that day when she suddenly heard her teacher's voice in Zhaoga City. Feeling startled, she hurried to the royal palace. Jing Jiu was quite satisfied when he saw her. She is the best chess player among my students, he said to Yuan Shijing, and I believe she's good at playing mahjong as well. Empress Hu didn't lie, and Jing Jiu didn't misjudge her. These two women were indeed very good at playing mahjong, and the two men and the two women cooperated well with each other. The green mahjong tiles rolled on the table, making a pleasant sound. Jing Yao stood behind Empress Hu to encourage her, and Ping Yongka stood behind Jing Jiu, ready to pour tea for him at any moment. Apiao sat by Yuan Shijing's side and gave him advice. Sometimes she couldn't help but play the tiles herself, chattering happily. Gu Qing was cooking the hot pot not far away, and Bluebird was looking at the distance from the windowsill. Countless chancellors, eunuchs, and palace servant girls were standing outside the grand hall, ready to serve them at any moment. They played mahjong and ate the hot pot. They cooperated well. The royal dowager Hu and Kei Nyang were not as nervous as they had been in the beginning, and they cooperated better. The speed at which they played the cards was in a comfortable rhythm, and the tacit understanding between them didn't require them to make eye contact. As a result, Yuan Shijing lost naturally and won happily. He didn't realize that he was the worst player at the table. The game lasted for a whole day and a whole night. When a morning light came again, Yuan Shijing suddenly stopped building the tiles. The atmosphere in the grand hall seemed to be frozen. The people outside the grand hall were even more nervous. Yuan Shijing glanced at them with a smile and suddenly said, I've never made a 9-lotus jeweled lamp in my life. Then he looked at Jing Jiu and said, You three have all made one. He didn't mean Jing Jiu, Kei Nyang, or Empress Hu, but Jing Yang, Tai Ping, and Lu Xi on the Shangda Peak many years ago. Hearing this, the people let out a sigh of relief and continued playing mahjong. It was a coincidence. Xiao Qiao's mother was born Xiao Qiao. In the next game, Yuan Shijing made a 9-lotus jeweled lamp. He looked at Jing Jiu and said with a spurious smile, You have been fooling me all along. He wasn't referring to the game today, but to the games of the Shangda Peak many years ago and the events that had taken place in the last several hundred years. Jing Jiu said, You're too honest. You're right, but I've been happy over the last several hundred years. Looking at the neat mahjong tiles, Yuan Shijing laughed out loud and walked out of the grand hall, turning into snowflakes in the morning wind. Chapter 657. A heavy snowfall suddenly occurred in Zhaoga City in the summer. The snowfall lasted for 3 days. The temperature dropped abruptly, and a thin layer of ice formed on the surface of the lake. Jing Jiu went to the Zhao garden. During the day, he covered his face with a conical hat. At night, He stared at the stars in a daze. The snowfall stopped, and the clouds dispersed. The stars in the sky were suddenly stained with a blood-red color. It was not an ominous sign. It was because Zhao Liu had arrived. The small boat sank slightly, and the sound of breaking ice could be heard. It was a sound she made on purpose. Jingjiu turned his head around and said, "She's here." Zhao Liu uttered and sat down by his side. She held his hand and placed it on her face. Hundreds of lights appeared in the night sky. They were not shooting stars, but sword lights. The Aoyama sect came to Zhaoga City to welcome back their master sword justice. Though they had left, and the wind and snow had stopped, they still needed to bring back the solemnity and cleanliness. Jingjiu pulled back his gaze from the night sky and asked, "Where is Nan Wang?" "She stayed in Aoyama to guard the place," said Zhao Liu softly as she put down his hand. "She seems to be very sad." Nan Wang was the young sister of Taiping Jinren. Now that the two big brothers who loved her the most were gone, what should she do? She was already a figure in the heavenly arrival state, and nobody in the world dared to offend her. But what should she do? Jingjiu and Zhao Liu left Zhaoga City. They didn't go back to Aoyama directly, but went to the outskirts of Dayuan City. They walked past the stream full of lotus flowers, the stone path in the mountains, and the old wooden bridge after they saw the old wooden bridge. They arrived at the 3,000 nunnery. The nun of the 3,000 nunnery was the successor of the old Grand Preceptor, so she did not recognize Jingjiu. However, since he was not wearing a bamboo hat, the nun could guess their identity from his face and Zhao Liu's short black hair. She hurriedly and respectfully welcomed them in. There was a stream under the bridge, and the place where the cottage used to be was now a forest. There was a grave in the forest. It looked a little lonely, but it was not lonely. The nun knew the relationship between Jingjiu and the nunnery, as well as his relationship with the 3,000 nunnery. Seeing his gaze fall on the grave, she was worried that he would be unhappy. So she hurriedly explained, "This is the grave of Benefactor Li. 7 years ago." Jingjiu indicated that there was no need to say more. He led Zhao Liu to the grave and said, "This is the young Master Li I told you about." Young Master Li's name was not written on the tombstone, only 4 words. Different paths lead to the same destination. The first 2 words refer to the different paths of immortals and mortals. The last 2 words meant that we would eventually return to the Great Tao. The young Master Li would still die after taking the magic pill. Lien Sanyue was the strongest swordsman in Chaotian, but she would die as well. Zhao Liu suddenly said, "I think the person in the painting in his house is Lien Sanyue." Many years ago, the young Master Li's family was in decline. A painting he had treasured for many years was stolen by his so-called friend, and Gu Qing sent someone to bring it back. She had seen it on the Shima Peak. In the painting, there was a starry night and fog on the cliff, and a girl holding an umbrella in the fog. The girl's eyes and brows were as straight as a line, and her expression was mild and indifferent. Jingjiu didn't say anything, nor did he try to find the painting. The painting was an heirloom of the Li family. If the girl in the painting was Lien Sanyue from hundreds of years ago, it might explain why the young Master Li loved her so much. Of course, this explanation was not necessarily correct, and it was not necessary. This was the first time Zhao Liu came to the 3,000 nunnery. She walked across the small bridge and arrived in front of the nunnery hall. She saw the round window and the view of the lake outside the window. Like everybody else, she felt much calmer now. Then, her line of sight moved down and fell on the bed in the nunnery hall. Baizeo was still sleeping soundly on the bed. It was unclear when he would be able to absorb all the fairy energy in his body. A great deal of the natural worm silk on her body had fallen off after 100 years, exposing her face. She furrowed her thin eyebrows in her dream, looking as lovable as ever. "It's good to sleep like this," said Zhao Liu. "Yes," said Jingjiu. "She's still alive after all." Zhao Liu turned to him and asked, "Where did she leave?" "Right here," said Jingjiu. The morning sunlight came from under the eaves of the house. This was the place where Lien Sanyue had left. Zhao Liu came over and hugged him. "It's okay. I won't leave," she said while patting his back softly. Jingjiu lifted his right hand and patted her back. Soon after, they went to White Town. They landed in a courtyard by the edge of the snowland and met Hejan and Sensei. Zhao Liu ate 2 barbecued fish, and Jingjiu looked at the pear tree a few times. As they walked out of the courtyard and walked on the field covered with mud and snow, Zhao Liu suddenly said, Gu Qin grew up in a large clan, so there are some things he doesn't understand. Hejan and Sensei had been together for several decades, and Lu Shui and Ning Xiaoa had been together for more than 100 years. They didn't get married, nor did they have any ceremony. They didn't care about what others thought of them, since they couldn't see them anyway, so it was less troublesome. Jingjiu said, he thinks too much, so it's easy for him to make things troublesome. This was the first time they had discussed what had happened to Gu Qin. Zhao Liu didn't quite understand, asking, is this kind of thing so interesting? Many years ago, when they were looking at the Jiaxing Tower in Shangzhou, she had asked the same question. Jingjiu said, liking, disliking, liking both, and disliking you can form many combinations. Sometimes it's quite interesting. I understand liking, Zhao Liu said, but the love in the books often makes people lose their minds and feel so much pain that they want to die. I don't understand why. The so-called love is the attraction between a man and a woman, the calmness and the promise brought by intimacy. Jingjiu said, the promise is like a shackle with a sense of ceremony and pressure. It's like cooking meat where the taste is stronger. Of course, breaking the promise is also very attractive to humans. All in all, like what I said earlier, all kinds of combinations are interesting. Zhao Liu shot him a glance and said, you speak as if you know a lot. This kind of thing isn't complicated, Jingjiu said. It's easy to understand after thinking about it. Zhao Liu asked after some thought, doesn't that mean it's still boring? Yes, Jingjiu agreed. As they were talking, the two of them had arrived in front of a simple Buddhist temple. This was where the Zen master lived in White Town. It was quiet in front of the temple gate. 2 or 3 monks came in and out of the temple in silence. A middle-aged monk suddenly halted his steps and looked at Jingjiu. Jingjiu also felt this monk looked familiar, and somehow he felt a sense of intimacy with him. The middle-aged monk looked at Jingjiu's face and was taken aback for a moment. Then he came back to his senses, his eyes full of surprise and delight. Jingjiu also recognized him. He was the young monk whom he had met a few times. However, more than 100 years had passed, and his face was covered with hardships, so Jingjiu didn't recognize him immediately. Moreover, the old monk wasn't by his side. The middle-aged monk was about to say something, but he covered his mouth reflexively. Then he remembered that his master was dead, and nobody wanted him to practice the vow of silence anymore. He couldn't help but cry out in sorrow. He didn't say anything from the beginning to the end. Jingjiu guessed what had happened just by looking at the change in his expression. He reached out his hand and patted the monk's shoulder. The middle-aged monk cried, even more sadly. For some reason, Jingjiu had always liked this pair of master and disciple. Knowing that the old monk had passed away, Jingjiu couldn't bear to see him cry so sadly, so he patted him with his palm. Zhao Liu widened her eyes, wondering if he thought life was so bitter that he wouldn't feel sad if he was beaten to death. Jingjiu's palm landed on the top of the middle-aged monk's head. The middle-aged monk fell to the ground, snoring loudly. Thank you very much. Zen master walked out from the gate of the courtyard and glanced at the middle-aged monk, thinking that it was really hard to predict the fate of fortune. Who would have thought that this ordinary junior could receive the enlightenment of the immortal Jingyang? Jingjiu said, don't thank me. It has nothing to do with the Guochang temple. It's just that I like this kid. Why? Asked Zen master. Jingjiu said after some thought. Maybe it's because he likes to talk. Didn't you dislike me for talking too much back then? Asked Zen master. It's still the same now, said Jingjiu. Men, sighed Zen master. Shouldn't I be the one to say that? Asked Zhao Liu. Though the number of believers was still small, the North Divine Army and the cultivation practitioners of various sects needed the daily necessities, so the city was crowded with the traveling merchants from the south. No accumulated snow could be seen on the streets, but the ground was muddy after being stepped on. Jingjiu and Zhao Liu passed through the city and walked on the slanted stone path. They could vaguely see the patch of red cliff and the upper part of the small temple in the distance. "Did you really wake up 17 years ago?" I lied to him. "But you heard everything Gu Qing told you." "Hearing it doesn't mean I woke up. To put it more precisely, my spiritual soul was in the green sky mirror at the time." "Oh, I think many things have happened in the green sky mirror. 100 years is indeed a long time, but there aren't many stories. I've been cultivating most of the time. It's just that the kid of the Zhang family came to disturb me from time to time, which is a bit annoying, like what happened to Gu Qing." "Is the eldest young master Zhang still alive?" "Actually, he's in good health, and he's thinking of going to the ocean to find that strange golden fish. As a matter of fact, is there really no way to bring the king of fire carps back to Aoyama? Unless we can bring the fire source under the cold mountain with us. Why bother? Why don't we just occupy the cold mountain?" While they were chatting, the color of the red cliff became clearer and clearer. The small temple also revealed itself completely. Stepping over the doorsill and entering the temple, Jingjiu stood there quietly for a while looking at the chubby Buddha statue with a smile on his face. The broken parts of the golden Buddha statue looked like they were bleeding. The color of the blood had faded a long time ago after so many years. The iron broadsword of 100 feet in front of the Buddha statue was still full of cracks, and it was unclear when it would regain its sharpness. Jingjiu walked to one end of the iron broadsword and placed his right hand on the blade of the broadsword facing upward, and then walked toward the other end. The sparks between his palm and the blade of the broadsword sputtered all the way. Chapter 658. The iron broadsword seemed to have been resharpened, and many small cracks on it were wiped off. The rest of the broadsword became as bright as new, except for the large crack in the middle that couldn't be repaired. "A clear broadsword will spread out like water." "Thanks a lot," said the broadsword king, Chao Yuan. Jingjiu said, "You're welcome. I've figured out some new magic methods over the last 100 years. Let's see if they're helpful for your wound." No sooner had he said this than a pure and exceedingly formidable sword came out from his right hand and landed on the huge iron broadsword, merging with the broadsword will. Whoosh! A gust of wind rose in the small temple. The broken paint on the surface of the golden Buddha statue quivered, as if it would fall off at any moment. This was the competition between the most powerful sword wills and the broadsword wills in the world. Zhao Liu was a swordsman in the upper limit of the broken sea state, but she still couldn't bear it. A few strands of her black hair fell off, and she had no choice but to retreat from the doorsill. The door of the small temple was closed by the wind. After a long while, the door of the small temple was opened again, and Jingjiu walked out. His face was a bit pale, and the blood stains could be vaguely seen on his broken earlobe. Zhao Liu shot a baffled glance at him, wondering if they were having a competition or if it was really a competition. Jingjiu didn't answer her question. If it were really a competition, nobody would know who the winner was. The door of the small temple was closed again. It could be seen that most of the golden paint on the surface of the Buddha statue had peeled off, but it looked more energetic than before. Jingjiu walked to the front of the cliff and looked at the snowland in the distance, asking, "Is it hard to get out?" Zhao Liu came to his side and asked, "Do you blame me? If you died in there, I would be angry," said Jingjiu. Zhao Liu said, "Things like this might happen more often in the future. I'm myself after all." After a long moment of silence, Jingjiu said, "There is something important between life and death. Maybe you are right." In the snowland, she walked between life and death for a long time, and once again confirmed that her Tao was different from Jingjiu's. Perhaps they would go their separate ways, but she would not regret it. Many years ago, she had told Bai Zhao that it was a blessing to be able to travel together for a while on the long road. Just like what Jingjiu said to Gu Qing, they were together now. What else could they not be satisfied with? It was not to mourn, even if it was to bid farewell to the deceased. It was not a nostalgia, though the route he and Lien Sanua took was the same as the one he and Lien Sanua had taken 100 years ago. It was just a simple journey, just like a human life. Jing Jiao and Zhao Liu walked on the streets of Jui City, wearing conical hats. It was as if they had returned to many years ago. Innumerable sounds came from all directions and entered their ears, which were quickly processed and turned into useful information. The contest between the Kunlun sect and the Windy Broadsword Church had ended a long time ago. The Kunlun sect had won 3 of the 5 contests and gained the control of the Coal Mountain. Even the situation in Jui City had become unstable. The sect master of the Kunlun sect, He Wei, had attacked ruthlessly. In the last 2 contests, he had wounded the Windy Broadsword Church severely and killed an elder of the Windy Broadsword Church. This had happened in the spring. Because of the significant event in Zhaoga City, it didn't attract too much attention. In fact, it was a very important event. After more than 100 years of plundering by the imperial court and the orthodox cultivation sects, the Cold Mountains seemed to have no deviant magic treasures, but in fact, there were many resources hidden there. Just the fire spirit veins under the ground were enough to make many people envious. The Kunlun sect had moved to the Cold Mountain on a large scale and set up the formation at the former site of the Scorching Sun Gorge, which was obviously influenced by the Zhongzhou school. Having heard all this, Zhao Liu's lethal intent grew stronger, saying, "I want to eat hot pot, all in red soup." Jing Jiao said, "There are a lot of boiled meat in Jui City, but the red soup is not necessarily good. It's better to eat the meat in your hand." Zhao Liu said while staring into Jing Jiao's eyes, "I want to eat the red soup." Jing Jiao reached out his hand and rubbed her head, saying, "As you wish." After entering the restaurant and having the not-so-authentic spicy hot pot, Zhao Liu narrowed her eyes satisfactorily and called out the thoughtless sword to peel a fruit for Jing Jiao. The blue bird landed on the windowsill, saying emotionlessly, "He Wei has come out. He's in the Scorching Sun Gorge." Zhao Liu asked her, "Are you not going to change into the human form?" "It's too hard to be a human," said the bluebird. "But we can eat hot pot," said Zhao Liu. "I'm a vegetarian," said the bluebird. Zhao Liu said after some thought, "It's true that we don't need hot pot." Though the sun was high in the sky, it was still cold on the Cold Mountain. A dark figure was traveling at a high speed on the seemingly barren field. It was the cold signal bird in the sky. The sect master of the Kunlun sect, He Wei, sat on the cold signal bird, looking down at the ground expressionlessly. On the mountains and in the wilderness, a dozen small affiliated sects of the Kunlun sect were cleaning up the area, and more than 200 Kunlun sword practitioners were setting up the formations at the ruins of the Scorching Sun Gorge. Though he had won the battle against the Windy Broadsword Church and had the secret support of Zhongzhou school, he didn't have the courage to make the whole of the Cold Mountain the territory of the Kunlun sect. The imperial court and the Aoyama sect wouldn't allow such a thing to happen. In fact, if it weren't for that matter, he wouldn't have attacked them so ruthlessly in the spring. The Zhongzhou school would believe in his sincerity only if he cut off all his escape routes. The reason he needed the Zhongzhou school to believe in his sincerity was because Zhao Liu was still alive. Zhao Liu might have guessed that it was he who had done it. If the Aoyama sect came to trouble him, he wouldn't admit it, but now that Jing Jiao had woken up, he didn't dare take the risk, and nobody knew when the Broadsword King would recover from his wound. Before that, he had to deal with the matter given to him by the Zhongzhou school, so that he would have a chance to obtain the magic method and even a wisp of fairy energy from the back mountain of Cloud Dream Mountain, and then he might have a chance to break through the state and become a truly powerful figure. The cold signal bird flew to the sky above the ruins of the Scorching Sun Gorge. Seeing their sect master arrive in person, the elders and disciples of the Kunlun sect bowed to him reverently. Seeing the huge crack on the ground spanning 100 miles, He Wei recalled the power of Lu Si's sword, feeling a chill in his heart. "Move faster," he yelled sternly. The elders and disciples of the Kunlun sect hurriedly responded. Suddenly, the look in He Wei's eyes changed slightly. Without hesitation, he summoned his flying sword exerted his most powerful sword movement and slashed toward the distant sky. An extremely bright and extremely cold sword light appeared between heaven and earth, full of killing intent and unimaginably powerful. The grass in the wilderness was swept up by the wind, and the gravel was rolling. The disciples of the Kunlun sect looked at the sky in shock, wondering if it was some evildoer who slipped through the net and came to spy on them. He was courting death. Crack! It was a light sound. The powerful sword light melted in the sky like snow in the sunlight. An extremely faint sword light flashed past He Wei's body, leaving behind a white mark that looked like snow. His right arm was separated from his body, falling to the ground, blood spurting out. The sword light and the white trace converged into one point, revealing a figure. Jingjiu was standing in the sky, several miles away. His white robe was fluttering. Chapter 659. Only then did He Wei feel the pain and let out a scream of anger and fear. The Kunlun disciples finally realized what had happened. They hurriedly flew up on their swords, trying to set up a sword formation to trap the intruder. Jingjiu disappeared from where he was. The faint sword light and the white shadow swept past He Wei again. He Wei screamed again as his left arm was cut off. Blood kept flowing down, wetting the cold signal bird's feathers. The cold signal bird sensed the daunting but omnipresent sword will in the sky, and its eyes were full of fear. It didn't dare to fly away. He Wei endured the pain and jumped off the cold signal bird, stepping on his flying sword and fleeing to the horizon. Crack! The flying sword was broken into 2 pieces, and he fell heavily from the sky to the ground. With the flash of the sword light, his legs were separated from his body. The sword light faded again. Jingjiu appeared by his side. The Kunlun disciples in the distance guessed his identity when they saw the scene. They were horrified and wondered why the immortal Jingyang was so terrifying. He Wei's pale face was full of despair. He looked at Jingjiu and said in a hoarse voice, "No." He still had a lot to say, but he didn't have the chance. His head tilted to one side and rolled to the ground. A wisp of light drifted out from the broken neck and turned into a human figure, rushing toward the barren mountain in a panic. Jingjiu ignored it and turned to the sword formation set up by the Kunlun disciples, waving his hand. Dozens of sharp sword wills pierced through the air and broke the Kunlun sword formation as easily as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. At the same time, more than a dozen swordsmen of Kunlun were cut into pieces. He Wei's sword ghost rushed to the barren mountain. Zhao Lei was there. She pointed at the sky, and more than a dozen sword lights drifted over and cut the sword ghost into pieces. The Kunlun disciples scattered like birds and beasts. The cold signal bird was so frightened that it did not dare to fly away until Jingjiu glanced at it. Suzai stood up from the grassland and bowed to Zhao Lei and Jingjiu respectfully. Zhao Lei said, "Take care of the rest." Back then, Jingjiu had promised Suzai that he would help him found a new sect, which required the spiritual source. One of the fire sources at the bottom of the cold mountain belonged to the mysterious dark sect, and it was merely returned to its rightful owner. Of course, the better spiritual source was in Kunlun Mountain. Suzai and those free-traveling practitioners and disciples he recruited in the West Ocean couldn't accomplish this. But the Windy Broadsword Church would get involved, and the imperial court would give them secret support. It would only take a few decades for them to pose a real threat to the Kunlun sect. Of course, the premise was that the Aoyama sect had to maintain its unique status in Chaotian and still be able to intimidate the Zhongzhou school. Jingjiu and Zhao Lei didn't leave the cold mountain right away after they had taken care of this matter. Instead, they sneaked into the underground through a large crack to check on the fire carp. As they flew out from the crack, the people waiting for them had already arrived. Standing among the wild grass on the mountain, the immortal Tan looked so natural that he seemed to be a part of heaven and earth. Looking at Jingjiu, he sighed and said, "You killed He Wei and tried to deceive the divine animal of our sect. Immortal, don't you think it's a bit too much to do this?" Jingjiu said, "Since it's the Aoyama sect, we have to do it. The immortal Tan said, "You and I are both cultivation practitioners, so we should know that the path toward heaven is shapeless. There's no need to do it." Jing Jiu said, "What Yuan Qijing wants to do the most is to defeat you people. As his senior master, I have to help him accomplish his goal." Hearing this, the immortal Tan didn't get angry. He said calmly, "Our sects have been competing for thousands of years. How can we have a clear winner? Do you think you can destroy Cloud Dream Mountain?" After Jing Jiu and Nan Wang had entered the heavenly arrival state, the Aoyama sect had 4 figures in the heavenly arrival state and 3 principal guards, not counting Yin San, and many talented disciples. As a result, the Aoyama sect had 11 swordsmen in the Broken Sea state and more swordsmen in the Broken Sea state. In comparison, the Zhongzhou school hadn't produced any outstanding figures in the last 100 years. The difference in strength between the two sects was obvious. However, what the immortal Tan said was correct. The major orthodox sects with profound resources like the Aoyama sect and the Zhongzhou school had many tricks up their sleeves. It was basically impossible to defeat them and destroy their mountain gates. Moreover, the swordsmen never took risks. Given the current situation in the cultivation circle, it was the Zhongzhou school who should consider taking risks even if they wanted to. The slightly chilly mountain wind ruffled the wild grass in midsummer. The two of them stared at each other in silence from a distance of more than 100 feet. Nobody knew about the meeting between Jing Jiu and the immortal Tan on the coal mountain. In the eyes of the people of Aoyama, the Zhongzhou school had already entered the autumn season. If they didn't have the immortals Tan and Bai, the unicorn, 3 swordsmen in the highest state, and 2 fairy books, they would have surrendered a long time ago. Of course, the Aoyama sect had its own problem, and it was a serious one. As the saying went, the biggest problem was usually the internal problem. The conflict between the immortal Jingyang and the Taiping Zhenren had lasted for more than 400 years, and some people had died. More importantly, the internal conflicts were severe. As a result, the Aoyama sect couldn't advance steadily. Fang Jingtian had always wanted to bring Taiping Zhenren back, and even Guangzhou Zhenren supported the idea. If they didn't consider the attitude of the orthodox cultivation sects like the Guocheng Temple and Yamatai and the opposing force inside the Aoyama sect, they would have done so a long time ago. Shima Peak, Bihu Peak, and Tianguang Peak would never accept the return of Taiping Zhenren. Though the young disciples of Liangwang Peak respected Fang Jingtian very much, they wouldn't agree to the proposal because it was related to the ideals, right and wrong, and good and evil that they valued the most. If Fang Jingtian became the new sect master of the Aoyama sect in the spring, he might be able to change the opinion of the 9 peaks of Aoyama in a few decades. Unfortunately, he didn't have the chance to do so. Jing Jiu woke up and achieved the heavenly arrival state in one step. He severely wounded Taiping Zhenren in Zhaoga City and drove away the Dark Phoenix and the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect. Next, he went to the cold mountain and killed He Wei, the sect master of the Kunlun sect, in front of the elders and disciples of the Kunlun sect and the cultivation practitioners of some small sections. The whole of Chaodian was shocked. How powerful was Jing Jiu now? Had he reached the level of the immortals Tan and Bai, or the immortal Lu Xi? Or had he recovered to the level of the immortal Jingyang? These conjectures had changed many things, or changed the attitudes of many people. For instance, few people in the Aoyama sect agreed with Fang Jingtian's statement that he was the all-in-one sword devil. For example, Cloudy Town suddenly became lively again. Cloudy Town had always been a famous scenic spot, and Aoyama was not far away from the town. Many tourists would come to visit the town every day, but it had rarely been as lively as it was recently. The cultivation practitioners could be seen everywhere on streets. Some old people in the town still remembered the stories told by their ancestors. They couldn't help but shake their heads, wondering if the town would become chaotic again. Fortunately, though Yuan Qijing had left, the Aoyama sect was more famous than before. Those cultivation practitioners had lived for a long time, so their memories were more vivid. They knew that this was not a place where they could act recklessly, so they behaved themselves. During the period when Jingjiu had slept in Zhaoga City for 100 years, nobody lived in Scenery Garden, and nobody came to visit it. It had become a lot more deserted. Now it looked like a vegetable market again. Some cultivation practitioners were sitting by the stream. Some were practicing the sword style of their own sex, and some were kowtowing to the ground. They still remembered the fate of a colleague who had been killed by the lightning, so nobody dared to use the risky sword moves. One early morning, a few sword lights suddenly illuminated the sky. In the next moment, the fog enshrouding Scenery Garden dispersed a bit, and a band of green smoke came out from the garden. A cultivation practitioner yelled in surprise, "Look, the great grandmaster of Jingyang has shown up." No sooner had he said this than he was dragged to the outside of the garden and given a good beating. The crowd wondered if he could talk. The band of green smoke was not a real smoke, but a watery mist. However, the color of the boiled tripe, coriander, and chili was mixed in the mist, which was different from the others. Except for Gu Qing and Lu Shui, all the others who were supposed to be here had arrived. They sat around a hot pot, but it was not a happy atmosphere. On the contrary, it felt like they were at daggers drawn, especially Zhuoruzhui. It was unclear what had happened that day, but he had picked up the meat before Zhao Liu several times, which made Yuan Chu very angry. Apiao and Ping Yongka told them briefly about what had happened in the underworld, and then they found that the dishes prepared by the Gu clan had been reduced by more than half. So they shut up immediately and picked up the bowls and chopsticks to pick up the meat. Tong Yin gave up her seat after eating some. She walked to the stream and started playing chess with herself. Lying on the bamboo chair, Jingjiu was lost in thought while looking at the flowing clouds in the sky. Suddenly, he stood up. Whoosh! A gentle breeze blew over, stirring up the fog. He flew into the sky, passed through the flowing clouds, became a tiny black, and then disappeared from everyone's sight. Zhuoruzhui and Yuan Chu held their bowls and looked at the sky with their mouths open. They did not know what had happened. Zhao Liu lowered her head and continued to pick up the meat. Apiao kept giving her ideas. The tripe is cooked. Let's get one first. Ping Yongka was nervous and excited at the same time. He shouted, "Master has ascended again." With a crackling sound, several bolts of lightning fell from the sky, stretching for miles, like an exaggerated flash of sword light. These bolts of lightning were extremely bright. When they shone on the chessboard, even the black chess pieces seemed to turn white. Tong Yin grabbed a chess piece with 3 fingers and was about to put it on the board when she suddenly stopped in midair. After a while, she said calmly, "It's really useless." In front of bright light, the distinction between black and white was not important. In front of great power, conspiracies and calculation abilities were useless. He put the chess piece back into the urn, then slowly put the chess pieces on the chessboard back into the urn. He stood up and said to the others, "I'm going out for a walk." Zhuoruzhui and the others stared at the lightning in the sky and waved their hands indifferently. It was not until a while after Tong Yin had left Scenery Garden that they came back to their senses. They looked at each other, wondering if he had left just like that. The lightning in the sky gradually subsided, and the rumbling thunder was replaced by the croaking of the frogs in the stream. Jingjiu returned to the courtyard, his body surrounded by blue lightning. No one knew what he was doing, and no one dared to stop him. At that moment, there was a sudden knock on the door of Scenery Garden. The sound was like thunder, shaking the stream and cutting off the croaking of the frogs. It was easy to guess who the visitor was based on the commotion and the fact that they didn't regard each other as outsiders. Zhao Liu and Zhuoruzhui looked at each other tacitly, put down their bowls and chopsticks, and left the courtyard. Apiao landed on Yuan Chu's shoulder and patted his head. Yuan Chu came back to his senses and hurried to the outside, but Ping Yongka grabbed his sleeve. He looked at Yuan Chu and said pitifully, "Big brother, why don't you go and open the door?" Yuan Chu retorted angrily, "I've learned the 7-plumb sword style of Shilai Peak. If Fang Jingtian were here, I would go and open the door, but you've learned the endless sword style of Qingrong Peak. How can you escape?" Chapter 660. No matter how obedient Ping Yongka was, he couldn't help but feel indignant when he heard this, wondering why he would take such a risk even though his family name was Ping. However, he was the last-ranked personal disciple of Shinma Peak, so he couldn't escape the responsibility of opening the door. He left the courtyard dejectedly and went to the front gate of Scenery Garden. Soon, he came back holding Nan Wang's hand. To be more precise, it wasn't holding hands. He bowed slightly and raised his right hand, holding Nan Wang's wrist respectfully. He had been in the royal palace of Zhaoga City and the royal city of the underworld over the years, so he was used to the behavior of some people. He showed it reflexively out of fear that day. Nan Wang had an indifferent expression on her face. She held her head high and stared straight ahead, looking very much like an empress dowager. She drew back her right hand and waved it disdainfully when they arrived in the courtyard. Ping Yongka felt as if he had been pardoned. He didn't want to stay any longer. Whoosh! He turned into a flash of sword light and disappeared into the distance. Jing Jiao said to her, "You should wait a few more years. It's a bit more stable." Nan Wang arched her eyebrows slightly, asking why. Jing Jiao uttered in bewilderment. Nan Wang walked to his side and sat on the floor under the eaves, saying, "You started from the beginning. There's no reason for me to be slower than you." "Why?" Jing Jiao said with a faint smile. "I don't want to argue with you." Nan Wang looked at his face in surprise, wondering why his temperament had changed so much. Did the departure of Big Brother affect him so much? Jing Jiao raised his right hand and reached it in front of her. Nan Wang wouldn't lower her head like Lu Shui, nor would she put her cute little face on his palm. She sneered and took out a small alcohol jar from her chest pocket and put it on his palm heavily, making a pa sound. It was unclear what the small alcohol jar was made of, but it was obviously extraordinary. It emitted a faint green glow, and there seemed to be a formation on the mouth of the jar. Jing Jiao, on the other hand, easily opened the wine pot. He seemed to be very familiar with it, as if he had opened it many times in the past hundreds of years. He didn't know how much wine there was in the small wine pot, but he didn't finish it even after drinking for a long time. He thought that Nan Wang must have refined it again. Even a whale drink. Well, he shouldn't use the word whale. He put down the wine pot, wiped his lips that didn't have any wine stains, and handed the small wine pot back. Nan Wang took the wine pot and casually took a sip. His face was expressionless as he said, "She has been gone for so long, and you still want to drink?" Many years ago, when Lien Sanuel went to White Town for some official business, Jingyang would go to Qingrong Peak to ask for wine from her. She didn't know why he was drinking, so she misunderstood. It would be a waste for the rest of her life. Now that Lien Sanuel had gone somewhere else and couldn't come back, the jealousy and anger she felt back then were meaningless. "To me, it hasn't been long since she left," Jing Jiao said. "You're right," Nan Wang said after a long moment of silence. "She treats you differently after all." Looking at the stars in the sky that couldn't be seen yet, Jing Jiao said, "Each star is different." "It's not this kind of difference," said Nan Wang. "What is it then?" asked Jing Jiao. Nan Wang shot him a glance and said, "The way you talk right now is a bit weird. Are you sure you haven't been possessed by Bai Ren's fairy spirit?" "You think too much," said Jing Jiao. Nan Wang stared at Jing Jiao's face for a long time. After he was certain that Jing Jiao was fine, he continued the previous topic. "Many years ago, when she was still Wudong, your cultivation state was still very low. You almost died trying to save her at the West Ocean. Later, you went to the Zhongzhou school to participate in the Dao competition and obtain the fairy spirit of longevity for her. Then, you almost died trying to temper Bai Ren's fairy awareness, and what happened in Zhaoga City." "So?" asked Jing Jiao. Nan Wang said, "A guy like you, who is lazy and afraid of death, has risked your life for someone else, and you have done it a few times. It means that you still like her." "Like I said, I like them all," said Jing Jiao. This was the answer Nan Wang received 100 years ago in Scenery Garden, right here. She liked many things in the mountains, rivers, and the universe, including you. At the time, Nan Wang had tears streaming down her face. She slapped Jing Jiao's face and hammered his chest, destroying a courtyard and leaving debris all over the ground. Today, she didn't cry, nor did she fight back. All she did was look at Jing Jiao indifferently, asking, "Are you willing to risk your life for me?" "I'm not sure. It's the same as how I didn't want to risk my life for her, but I still did it when she was in danger." Jing Jiao continued while staring into her eyes, "But you shouldn't try, because I don't want anything bad to happen to you." Nan Wang arched his eyebrows slightly, asking, "Who did you learn this from?" After some thought, Jing Jiao said, "I think it was Gu Qing." Nan Wang shot a mocking glance at him and asked, "Why didn't you let me like you back then?" Jing Jiao explained earnestly, "Because I like them all, so you too shouldn't like me. It's too troublesome." Nan Wang had nothing to say in response. He raised the wine jar and took a sip, then handed it back to Jing Jiao. The two of them drank in silence. After a long while, the small wine jar was finally empty. "Thank you for drinking with me," said Jing Jiao. Such a scene hadn't happened for many years. Thinking of what had happened back then, Nan Wang couldn't help but burst out laughing, saying, "Big brother hated it when you went to Qingrong Peak to drink with me." Jing Jiao said, "He couldn't do anything to you, so he gave all his resentment to me." Nan Wang stuck out his chest and said proudly, "Big brother loves me very much." It was true. Lucy I assigned a forbidden area of Bihu Peak to her as a bathhouse. Yuan Qijing, the most solemn of them all, didn't seem to have seen the merry night on Qingrong Peak for hundreds of years. The great formation of Aoyama would be open on time every year to welcome the spring rain, autumn wind, and first snow, so she could enjoy the scenery. Speaking of love and affection, she was indeed loved by many people because she was the young sister. "I heard you two played mahjong in the end." "Yes." Nan Wang raised a small wine jar in front of his eyes and looked at the sky above the mouth of the jar, saying, "It's good this way." "Big brother, was it painful when he left?" Thinking of the laughter and the wind and snow, Jing Jiao said, "He said he'd been very happy during the last hundreds of years." "That's good." Nan Wang stood up and said, while looking at Jing Jiao, "Since everyone was happy, why don't we do something else?" Jing Jiao understood what she meant. She was referring to Taiping Zhenren. Like Ping Yongka and Apiao, she was the youngest disciple of Taiping Zhenren. What kind of habit did Lu Xi and Yuan Qijing's affection for her come from? Where did Fang Jingtian and Guan Yuan Zhenren's dread of her come from? Where did all that love come from? When I entered Aoyama, I studied the formation of dissipating smoke and clouds with him. But the formation was fake, and he had tampered with it. Jing Jiao continued, "He didn't want me to ascend from the very beginning. For the cultivation practitioners, this was the most malicious act." Nan Wang asked confusedly, "My master treated you very well back then, so there's no reason for him to do such a thing. Could it be that he had other intentions?" Jing Jiao said, "I have a general idea of his intentions, but my cultivation is my own business. He can't do it. I won't meddle in your affairs, and I can't meddle in them. But now that my senior brothers are gone, I have to watch over Aoyama. Don't go too far." Having said that, Nan Wang waved her arm lightly. A silver bell rang, and countless sword strings appeared in the void, forming an invisible bridge that brought her up into the sky. Soon, she arrived at Aoyama in the distance. Looking at the petite figure that was gradually disappearing in the clouds, Jing Jiao curled up the corners of his mouth, revealing a gratified smile. Although it took a little longer, the little girl had finally grown up. With Nan Wang gone, those who had just left would naturally return. Ping Yongka was the fastest, returning to the courtyard in a flash. But as soon as his feet landed on the ground, he heard the silver bell ringing in the sky again. His face turned pale, wondering if this was the turning back sword. Accompanied by the crisp ringing of the bell, a snow-white long-haired cat landed by the stream. It looked like a tiger or a dragon, with an extraordinary temperament. Seeing that it was this cat, Ping Yongka let out a sigh of relief. After more than 100 years, he once again grabbed its tail familiarly and brought it to Jing Jiao, saying, "Master, Lord White Ghost is here." In Ada's eyes, there was no anger, only innocence and helplessness. He looked at Jing Jiao, probably meaning, "What's wrong with this disciple of yours? She knows who I am, but she is still so careless? With a smile, Jing Jiu held the cat in his bosom and stroked him from head to toe in a familiar manner. Ada knew Jing Jiu's current cultivation state, so he didn't dare be careless. He squinted his eyes, showing an expression of enjoyment, but he didn't forget to make thunderous snores. Zhuo Ruzhui and the others hadn't landed in the courtyard yet. When they heard the thunderous sounds, they had the same misunderstanding as Ping Yongka. They thought that Nan Wang had come back again, so they turned around and ran away hastily. Zhao Liu was the only one who was familiar with the snores, so she landed under the eaves softly. Ada rubbed against Jing Jiu's chin in an ingratiating manner. Jing Jiu turned over his palm and took out the snow-white cold cicada, placing it on top of Ada's head. Ada wagged his tail contentedly, jumped down from Jing Jiu's arms, and walked into Zhao Liu's arms. Zhao Liu noticed that the energy exuded by cold cicada was even colder than before, so she poked it with her finger with interest. Cold cicada turned over on Ada's head hastily, exposing its belly. "What should we do next?" she asked while poking cold cicada's belly. Zen Master had asked Jing Jiu the same question a few days ago. "No matter how much he thinks, he can't compare to what I've calculated in this life." Jing Jiu said this calmly as he took out the ceramic plate and the grains of sand that he hadn't seen for many years. Zhao Liu didn't say anything more. Ada stopped snoring as well. Ping Yongka didn't know what was going to happen, but he knew instinctively that something significant was going to happen. He became extremely nervous as he looked in the direction of the stream helplessly, but he didn't see Zhuo Ruzhui and the others. Jing Jiu picked up a grain of sand and put on the ceramic plate in a seemingly casual manner. The plate of scattered sand suddenly turned into a painting. It was a painting of heaven and earth. Chapter 661. Since many, many years ago, Jing Jiu liked to lie on the bamboo chair and play the game of piling up sand in this ceramic plate. Neither Lu Shui nor Zhao Liu knew what this game was. It wasn't until the plum meeting in Zhaoga City, where Jing Jiu and Tong Yin played an amazing game of Go and said something to each other, that they vaguely understood that this game was a method of calculation. Many years had passed, and Jing Jiu had gradually stopped playing this game. The people on the Shima Peak had seldom seen this ceramic plate and the fine sand, until now. A fine sand grain fell down and formed a picture. The surface of the undulating mountains and rivers was extremely smooth, with no cracks visible. It was because all the sand grains were arranged in an orderly manner according to Jing Jiu's idea. This required an unimaginable ability to construct space and calculate, which was beyond the capability of humans. It was quiet in Scenery Garden. The wind blew over the stream and the flowering trees by the stream, not daring to make any noise. Ping Yongka looked at the sand painting in the ceramic plate with his eyes wide open, thinking that his master was truly formidable, and that this was something even more difficult than ascension. Ada had left Zhao Liu's bosom and crouched obediently in front of Jing Jiu, his buttocks sticking up high in a respectful manner. Zhao Liu's reaction was the most natural. Perhaps it was because she had seen Jing Jiu play with the sand the most. She looked at the sand in the ceramic plate sideways while hugging her knees. Her messy hair was tousled by the gentle wind, passing through her eyes and dividing her black and white pupils into countless worlds. Her eyes suddenly grew brighter. It was not because she had seen the true meaning of the path in the sand, but because her eyes were brimming with tears. It was unclear what she had thought of that made her feel so sad. Back at the plum meeting in Zhaoga City, Jing Jiu said 4 words to her. "It's better if you don't understand it." At the time, she thought he had become very far away from her. Now she was a swordsman in the upper limit of the Broken Sea state. There were few things in the world that she didn't understand, so she understood what he meant by far away. All he needed was enough time to get far away from her. "It's still early." Jing Jiu knew what she was thinking. He reached out and rubbed her head to comfort her. Zhao Liu's short hair became even messier under his palm. Jing Jiu took out a braid and showed it to her. She had cut it off 100 years ago when she left the Jing house in Jiaoga City. Gu Qing had always kept it under his pillow because he was a reliable and meticulous person. So dirty. Zhao Leia looked at it with some disdain, but she didn't take it. Sword fire ignited on her fingertip, burning the braid into smoke. Whether it was the hair that was cut off, the peach blossoms at the entrance of Shuiyu Nunnery, or the begonia, they could all be forsaken, but Aoyama still had to be returned. They left Scenery Garden and headed for Cloudy Town. That restaurant, which had been passed down for more than 200 years, no longer served any other dishes, only various kinds of hot pot. With the protection of the Gu clan and the support of the tourists and the cultivation practitioners, the business of the restaurant was unimaginably good. However, they didn't dare take any more customers that day. Unfortunately, the group in Scenery Garden had just eaten a hot pot that day, so the manager could only kneel on the ground and watch those figures disappearing in front of him in disappointment. As they came to the outside of a house, Jing Jiu glanced at the horse-drawn carriage through the wall of the courtyard, and then continued walking forward. Though they didn't ride on the swords and walked on their feet, it didn't take long for them to pass the long mountain path and arrive outside the southern mountain gate due to their current cultivation states. The thick fog dispersed without the aid of the wind. A simple and even crude stone gate appeared in front of them. A caretaker of Aoyama was dozing off behind the table, but he was not the caretaker of the past. Jing Jiu didn't disturb the caretaker. He walked past the stone gate, his white cloth fluttering in the mountain wind, looking like the clouds and fog. Zhao Leiyu and the others followed Jing Jiu into the gate while holding Ada in her arms. Not far from the southern mountain gate was the South Pine Pavilion. It was here that Jing Jiu practiced his external sect cultivation, if sleeping could be counted as cultivation. The green pines were everywhere on the plateau, looking like umbrellas. The external sect disciples were sitting diligently under the pines, with a white hot fog rising from their heads. Occasionally, they could hear the yelling and practicing boxing in the deep end of the pine forest. Jingjiu didn't meet those young external sect disciples, nor was he interested in guiding them in their cultivation. He passed through the pine forest and went to the small building. Many years ago, he walked like this when he returned to Aoyama, like a lion inspecting his territory. What was he going to do today? Zhuo Ruzhui and Yuan Chu eyed each other nervously. The guard of the small building was an elder of Shuriwa Peak. As he was about to yell at the group of intruders, he suddenly saw Jingjiu's face. He rubbed his eyes reflexively and bowed to Jingjiu with a shout. Jingjiu waved his hand to signal for him to get up. He started looking at the portraits in the building with his hands folded behind his back. He started seeing the founding grandmasters of Aoyama, the great grandmaster, the immortal Dayuan, his master, the immortal Qinzhou, and then Taiping Jinren and himself. The portrait of Lu Xi was placed at the end. Standing in front of this portrait for a while, Jing Jiu suddenly pointed to the other two portraits in front of him and said, "Take them down." The elder of Shuriwa Peak was startled, but he didn't dare object. He took down the portraits with trembling hands and asked, "Immortal Sect Master," this, Jing Jiu said, "I'll hang them up when one of us dies." There was a mountain outside Shangzhou City. It was not famous, and there was no scenery on the mountain. There were only a dozen regular farmers living in their own courtyards, and it seemed that they didn't have any contact with each other. In the most secluded and remote courtyard of a farmer's house, there was a stone mill that had been in disrepair for many years. The Dark Phoenix stood on the stone mill, looking quite formidable. However, he looked a bit pitiful because one of his tail feathers was missing. He was like a rooster crowing every morning and finding that the sun hadn't risen for a few days. Why? Why was his luck so good? Why is he the winner this time? The Dark Phoenix started pacing back and forth on the stone mill, looking rather anxious, like a tiger that had been trapped in a cage for many years. His voice grew sharper and more ear-piercing as he said, "The Immortal has obviously calculated everything and made Little Fourth the sect master. It will only take a little more than 10 years for us to return to Aoyama and take back the power in secret. We can conquer the center sect in the north and achieve the fruits in the south. After that, we can control Xiaoga City, and Chaotian will be ours. But why did he wake up at this moment? And he's so powerful. Pooh! The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect spat on the ground and cleared his throat, and then went back to gnawing on a greasy bone. The dark phoenix shot him a look of disgust, exclaiming, "How could you eat such a meat? It's disgusting. Since you've had a hard time eating it, can't you just throw it away?" The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect put the bone in his hand on the stone mill and said, after panting twice, "I don't have good teeth right now, so I don't have a good appetite. Otherwise, why can't I eat it?" The dark phoenix said in a mocking tone, "I've never seen a deviant devil as stupid as you. That's the all-in-one. You even dare to swallow it. How can your stomach recover when your stomach has such a big hole?" The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect said earnestly, "I'm different from you. It's not because of the injury. It's because I'm a bit old now." Hearing the word old, the dark phoenix fell silent, a hint of pity in his eyes as he looked at the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect. He was the principal guard of Aoyama and had a long life, so he could live for many years. But the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect was indeed very old. It was exceedingly quiet in the courtyard of the farmhouse. The wind blew over from the west, lightening the twilight and making the stars in the sky brighter. Looking at the large locust tree outside the courtyard, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect sighed in an old voice, "Immortal, I don't have many years left. I've been following you around the world for so long. When will it end?" A youth was sitting on the treetop of the large locust tree. His red clothing was rather eye-catching in the remaining twilight, as if it were on the verge of burning. His left arm had recovered, but it looked extremely fair and tender, like that of a newborn baby or a lotus root that had just been dug out from the mud. It was unclear if this was the magic that came with the total transformation, as it could even heal the wound caused by the all-in-one sword. Yeah, when will these days come to an end? Squatting on the treetop, San picked up a stone and threw it at a rat in the field. Seeing this, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect and the dark phoenix eyed each other, feeling extremely puzzled and worried. Chapter 662. Since early this morning, San had been squatting on the treetop to hunt the rats. The red cloth was full of pebbles, but only half of them were left. He didn't employ any magic or sword style. All he did was toss the pebbles. Even if the pebbles hit the rats, they wouldn't actually hurt them, but he would smile happily. If the pebbles missed the rats, he wouldn't show a happy expression even though he had been defeated. He would be very angry and even curse. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect and the dark phoenix were worried that he might be mentally disturbed because of the setback in Xiaoga City. Fortunately, he responded to the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect's words. It seemed that the word old not only affected the dark phoenix, but also him. Incense stood up and shook his cloth. He scattered the remaining pebbles to the foot of the locust tree and then leapt up into the night sky. "Huh! Huh!" Dozens of pebbles fell to the ground. He had flown back and forth in the night sky hundreds of times. His red cloth fluttered like a pair of flapping wings, drawing hundreds of obscure lines on the dark background. In the end, the lines overlapped and formed a complicated pattern. Even the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect and the dark phoenix couldn't figure out the meaning of this pattern. "I can't figure out why I've been defeated again and again." San landed in the small courtyard of the farmhouse. He took the cup of green liquor from the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect and sipped it slowly, a satisfied expression showing on his handsome and clean face. A moment later, he said, "I don't think it's because I'm a drunkard." It was not a funny joke, but the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect and the dark phoenix both laughed dryly to support him. The Battle of the West Ocean and the two battles before and after Xiaoga City were agreed upon by me and Emperor Shao. There was nothing wrong with the plan or the details. San went on with a faint smile. Yet, we had only gained some small advantages in the Battle of the Cloud platform. and the others were all losers. Why? It's because we encountered that little friend Tong Yin in the Battle of the West Ocean, and Lien Sanuel woke up in Jiaoga City, and then he woke up on his own. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect said, "Luck. I insist that it was luck." Insan drank another mouthful of wine and said, "If his luck can last this long in this life, then it's luck. What are we fighting for?" The dark phoenix let out an indignant shriek as he said, "The situation is not so bad right now. There are so many young people who support the immortal in Aoyama. If the two sides had a fight, we would still have the upper hand." Insan downed the remaining wine in his cup in one gulp. Looking at the south in the night, he said indifferently, "But if everything in this life is already calculated by him in advance, are you sure we still have the upper hand?" The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect said, while shaking his head, "Lu Ci and Yuan Shijing have left one after the other. Even if this is irreversible, what about Lien Sanwei? If he could predict everything, would he just watch everything happen and do nothing? Isn't such a heartless person even more terrifying than us evil people?" Insan said, "Isn't the word heartless and heartless the most suitable for him?" He was an extremely selfish cultivation practitioner back then. He only pursued the path toward heaven and didn't care about anything else. Of course, this is just my speculation. What do you intend to say, immortal? The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect pressed. Insan said with a faint smile, "I want to know how he lived this life and why his luck is better than his previous life. The best way to know how a man has lived his life is not to read his biography, nor to listen to the accounts of those who have seen him, but to go to the place where he was born and the place where he grew up, and to see for yourself." After many years, Insan returned to Cloudy Town, which was not far away from Aoyama. He was alone this time. He ate the hot pot in that famous restaurant and found that it tasted different from before. Then he realized that he was not the same person as before, and his taste had changed a lot. It was in this private room that the devil man of the underworld he possessed was tied up by Zhao Liu with a sword rope and then killed by a flying sword. Thinking of this event, he threw the chopsticks on the table gloomily and rolled up his sleeve, looking at his left hand. The sword rope was the thoughtless sword. The sword rope in the old plum garden of Jiaoga City was the thoughtless sword. One couldn't step into the same river, but he could be tied up by the same sword rope twice. Would the same thing happen again? After leaving the restaurant, he went to Scenery Garden outside the town. He didn't pay for it. The fog outside Scenery Garden was very thick, and the cultivation practitioners were still waiting outside. He broke through the fog and landed on a flowering tree by the stream without alerting the formation. Smelling the faint smell of hot pot that still lingered in the air, he wrinkled his nose cutely and muttered to himself, "You're a person who doesn't like to eat, so how did you teach so many disciples who like to eat hot pot?" In the next moment, he sneered, "You have to learn from me." After leaving Scenery Garden, he went to the Gu clan and stole the horse-drawn carriage. Leaning on the soft cushion, he looked at the light coming through the skylight and kept on drinking the fine wine that would be changed every once in a while. The wheels of the carriage rolled over the green stone slabs. He went all the way to the deep mountain and arrived in a remote village. Normally, it was impossible for such a remote village to have such a wide and straight road, but this village was special to begin with. Standing on the cliff outside the village, Insan looked down at the fields with narrowed eyes. He saw that the rice fields were golden yellow, and it was the harvest season. There were many large houses in the village, and strong servants could be seen coming and going from time to time. It was obvious that they were not ordinary people, and they must be rich and noble, unlike the scene in the deep mountain. He came to the village and found a short and skinny old farmer in the fields. He learned a lot of things simply by looking at his amiable and harmless face. About 150 years ago, an immortal master came to this small mountain village and took away 2 gifted children. People in the village didn't know what happened later, but they knew that one of the children eventually became a very powerful figure in a large cultivation sect. That child's surname was Lu. The parents of the child were taken care of by the immortal master and lived for more than 100 years, giving birth to many children. For the sake of the immortal master, both the imperial court and other big families naturally respected the children of the Liu clan and didn't dare to offend them. In this way, the Liu clan had become the biggest family in the prefecture, and this village had become the private property of the Liu clan. The original families had either moved away or become servants of the Liu clan. "Is the Liu clan really so powerful?" asked San. The short and skinny old man picked up a cloth towel and wiped the sweat on his dark face. He pointed at the rice fields in front of him and said, "All the fields belong to the Liu clan. Do you think it's not powerful?" San said, "Such a big family must have done a lot of dirty things." Before he could finish, the short and skinny old man's eyes were full of fear. He waved his hand and said, "I don't know anything." San said with a smile, "We're just chatting casually. There's no need for you to be so careful." The short and skinny old man didn't dare to answer him. He waved his hand to signal him to leave quickly. San was about to leave when he suddenly thought of the rumor in the cultivation world. He asked, "Sir, is it difficult to learn how to farm?" The short and skinny old man didn't understand what he meant and said, "What's so difficult about farming?" San was interested and said, "Could you please teach me how to farm?" The short and skinny old man was even more confused. Looking at the red clothes he was wearing, he asked, "You're not an opera singer?" San couldn't help but laugh, saying, "You can say that. Opera singers are fake skills. I want to learn real skills." The short and skinny old man's eyes suddenly became a bit cloudy. He came to his senses the next moment and completely forgot why he wanted to teach him. He asked, "What do you want to learn?" San said, "Anything." The short and skinny old man asked, "What do you know?" "I don't know anything," San said earnestly. Under the sunlight, the sword-washing stream was like a golden whip held in the hands of the peaks of Aoyama. It was extremely calm at the moment, but it also seemed that it could break through the sky at any time. Countless light spots suddenly appeared on the surface of the stream. It wasn't because the koi fish in the stream knew many years in advance that an extremely powerful senior king was coming, so they expressed their joy. It was because of the countless sword lights in the sky. Countless sword lights rose from the peaks and came to the sky above the sword-washing stream. Then they fell down quickly. The scene was so shocking that the young men and women in the hall of sword-washing turned pale and didn't dare to say a word. Jingjiu, Zhao Leiyu, and the others appeared at the downstream of the stream. "Welcome back to the mountains, immortal sect master." The banks of the sword-washing stream and the cliffs on both banks were filled with people. Their voices echoed among the peaks of Aoyama and didn't fade away for a long time. The iron eagles on Yunqing Peak were startled, and the monkeys on Shuriwet Peak began to scream. Looking at Shuriwet Peak in the distance, Jingjiu arched his eyebrows slightly. As a result, the noisy screams of the monkeys stopped abruptly. Guang Yinjinren let out a bitter smile, thinking that everything was true and that the young senior master didn't like the monkeys of his clan. He bowed to Jingjiu and said, "Greetings, senior master." "Big brother?" asked Zhao Leiyu, arching her eyebrows slightly. Guang Yunjinren understood what she meant after a moment of bewilderment. He let out another bitter smile and bowed solemnly, saying, "Greetings, immortal sect master." Chapter 663. Then, Chun Yutan, the peak master of Bihu, Emo, Qi, and Guanan Shan, who represented Tingguang Peak, and the elders of the peaks all came forward to salute him. Not everyone came to welcome his return, such as Nan Wang and Fong Jingtian. The most important thing for a cultivation practitioner was to cultivate. They usually stayed in seclusion for more than 10 years, or even longer. No one could blame them for that. Similarly, not everyone welcomed Jingjiu's return. For example, the new peak master of Yunqing. Even though he saluted with the others, his expression was cold. Ping Yongka, who had not been back to Aoyama for 100 years, asked Yuan Chu in a low voice, "Senior brother, who is this man?" Yuan Chu said, "Jin Sadeo. After Fu Wang's death, He is now the peak master of the Sword Peak. Ping Yongka had a special affection for Yunqing Peak and was curious about the new peak master of Yunqing. Seeing his expression and demeanor, he couldn't help but feel disappointed. He said in a low voice, "That's it. He's not as good as me." His voice was so low that only Yuan Chu and the others could hear him, and they almost burst out laughing. To everyone's surprise, Jing Jiao suddenly said, "Then you can do it." It was dead silent by the stream of sword washing. A gentle breeze blew over the surface of the water, stirring up the ripples. The elders and disciples of the peaks thought they had heard it wrong. Then they came to their senses and were shocked speechless. Jean Sadeo's face turned pale. Fortunately, Jing Jiao just said it casually and didn't do anything. Then, he didn't go back to Shima Peak to see his monkey, nor did he hurry to Tianguang Peak to repair the chair. Instead, he went directly to Shilai Peak. Seeing the figure heading toward Shilai Peak, people became even more panicked, wondering if the two sides were going to start a war as soon as the immortal Sectmaster came back. Countless streaks of sword light followed. Guang Yuanjin was extremely worried. He wanted to say something to Jing Jiao, but he found that he couldn't catch up with Jing Jiao's speed. He couldn't help but feel shocked. There was a slight buzzing sound. Jing Jiao landed on the square in front of Shilai Peak. A cool breeze spread out from the white robe and blew in all directions, blowing all the dust that had accumulated in the cracks of the green stone slabs. Like a wave of air, it swept into the distance. The green pines around the square swayed like waves and couldn't calm down for a long time. Fang Jingtian walked out of the dark and gloomy hall slowly. His two extremely long silver eyebrows were swayed by the gentle breeze. He didn't secluded cultivation and didn't pretend to do so. "It's been a long time," said Jing Jiao while looking at him. Yes, it had been a long time. 150 years ago, he returned to Green Mountain and climbed Shima Peak with Zhao Liu. Since then, Fang Jingtian had been trying to kill him. When Jingyang's fake abode opened, Fang Jingtian wanted to kill him, but Zen Master's Lotus carriage happened to pass by. During the Battle of Cloud Platform, all the elites of Aoyama came out. Fang Jingtian was in charge of Aoyama. He wanted to kill everyone on Shima Peak, but Liu Ada happened to be there. Jing Jiao was a person who would turn around and leave when he saw the shadow of death. He had experienced many life-or-death crises in this life, but they were all his own choices, and he had prepared for them carefully. Only Fang Jingtian's lethal intent had made him feel threatened, because he was still very weak at that time, not to mention the Aoyama sect leader ceremony 100 years ago. In the eyes of the world, he was forced out by Fang Jingtian. The flames and sword lights were withdrawn. Guang Yuanjin landed by Jing Jiao and waved his sleeve backhandedly. Countless pure sword wills broke through the air and formed a barrier in front of the Grand Hall of Shilai Peak, blocking all the disciples of the third generation outside. Only the peak masters, the elders of the second generation, and those talented disciples who had broken through the sea state, such as Zhuo Ruzhui, were allowed to enter the hall. Senior Master tried to persuade him. "Please calm down, Senior Master." The decision to appoint a new sect master wasn't because Big Brother was greedy for power. It was because you were in a deep sleep in Zhaoga City, and the Nine Peaks had no master. The elder Emochi also came over. He didn't have time to calm down and tried to persuade Jing Jiao. "Master, Master, Master." Soon after, Chun Yutian and more elders came to the front of Shilai Peak. Most of them didn't dare come forward. Only a few elders with the highest status and seniority surrounded Jing Jiao and tried to persuade him. What they said was reasonable. Yuan Qijing had just left Aoyama not long ago. It would be inexcusable if Aoyama fell into civil strife. More importantly, the momentum of Aoyama was at its peak. If Aoyama suffered a setback, Zhongzhou School would have a chance to catch its breath. However, no matter what Guang Yuanjin and others said, Jing Jiao didn't give any response. All he did was look at Fang Jingtian in the distance in silence. Gradually, the voices of persuasion died down. The simple and honest elder Mo Chi still didn't want to give up. He said with a blushing face, "Senior Master, Senior Master. All of a sudden, Rujui stepped forward and helped Elder Imochi to take a few steps forward with a smile on his face. Elder Imochi was even more worried. He slapped Rujui's head, saying, "It's serious, serious. Don't make a scene." Ouch! Rujui fell into Elder Imochi's arms. "Senior Master, you hit me too hard," he said in a painful tone. "I'm dying." Elder Imochi was startled, wondering what was going on. He helped Rujui sit down hastily. A cold voice broke the awkward and tense silence in the square. "You all call him Senior Master today, but what about that year? You still didn't recognize him as a Senior Master, even though he had the will of the immortal Lucii and the sword justice," said himself. "Why? It was because he had just broken the sea state back then, and you didn't think he was strong enough to fight. But why don't you doubt him anymore? Is it because of Zen Master's attitude or Senior Master Lien Sanus? Neither. It's because he can fight now." Countless gazes fell on Zhao Lei, waiting for what she would say next with a strong uneasiness in their hearts. She looked at Fong Jingtian expressionlessly and said, "If that's the case, why don't we fight today?" The square in front of Shilai Peak grew even quieter. Fong Jingtian said appreciatively while looking at Zhao Lei with his silvery eyebrows fluttering slightly, "You're indeed a genius who has reached the upper limit of the sea state the fastest since the founding of our Aoyama sect. The sword work of the Aoyama sect is all about fighting. How can we not fight?" Then he turned to Jingjio and said, "In fact, I've been waiting for you for a long time." Upon hearing this, an uproar broke out in the square. As Guang Yuanjinren was about to say something, Fong Jingtian raised his right hand and said, "Young brothers, this has nothing to do with you." No sooner had he said this than Jingjio vanished from the square. Jingjio left with the wind after stroking the white cat in Zhao Lei's arms. The snow on Shanda Peak didn't melt all year round. Walking among the peaks, one could only see the monotonous white and black rocks except for the green pines and cypresses, which made one feel as if he was in the snowland in the north. As a breeze suddenly blew up, Jingjio and Fong Jingtian landed outside the manor cave, bringing up some snowflakes. Many years ago, they had lived and cultivated here. Now that they had returned, it was hard to tell what they felt. "I haven't lived here for a long time, and my young sister and the others haven't lived here for a long time. Our master was harmed by you too. Speaking of which, we haven't spent much time with our master." Standing by the cliff's edge, Fong Jingtian looked at the vast mountains outside the snowy fog and said expressionlessly, "But a master for a day is a father for a lifetime." Ignoring him, Jingjio turned around and walked toward the manor cave. Fong Jingtian's silvery eyebrows fluttered slightly like the snowflakes. Curling up the corners of his mouth, he revealed a mocking smile and turned around to follow Jingjio. The well leading to the underground sword jail was still exuding a faint cold intent, but the old man who used to stand by the well and look down into it was no longer in this world. "How did Big Brother feel when he left?" asked Fong Jingtian. Jingjio didn't want to talk much with this person, but he was willing to talk more about Yuan Qijing and Lucii. He said he was very happy, he said. "That's good." Fong Jingtian drifted up and landed at the bottom of the well. Along with the eternal sunlight, the two figures drifted down to the bottom of the well. It was dry on the ground, devoid of snowflakes and damp accumulated water. The dead dog, who looked like a black mountain, opened his eyes slowly. The expression in his eyes was as profound as ever, but they were calm and gentle. Today I listened to the Netese cloud song of This Star Comes from Earth, and suddenly heard the familiar prelude. I have listened to the album of Do Wei's Dark Dream many times at the university. I like it very much, and so does my brother-in-law. When my sister was pregnant, we played this song every day at home. Later, when the child was crawling on the ground, we often played this song at home. We have always joked that our niece's prenatal education and preschool education are indeed different from others. The reason why I had such a feeling today is that my precious niece was sitting at the desk next to me, drawing in front of the computer when the music was playing. She's a college student, majoring in drawing. I listened to the song and looked at her, asking her if she still remembers it. She said, of course. I don't feel that I'm old, but I feel very good. Though the word inheritance is a bit exaggerated, the influence between family members and the older generation is still there. Like Taiping and Fong Jingtian, I had intended to write more about Fong Jingtian, but I deleted them to save space. That's the gist of it. Actually, to change the story, he is Chun Pingping. He is the Avenger. I can't say that I like him, because I was stingy and didn't give him any ink. Here, I'll add a few lines to thank him. Chapter 664. The sunlight shining down from the sky illuminated the stage-like floor. Fong Jingtian bowed to the dead dog earnestly. Regardless of what attitude the dead dog had toward Taiping Zhenren, it was evident that he had obtained the permission of the dead dog to leave the sword jail. The dead dog revealed a smiling expression in his eyes. Then he looked at Jingjiao and asked with his eyes, "Are you sure you want to do this?" "It's simple," said Jingjiao. The dead dog fell silent for a while, and then closed his eyes again, saying nothing. A sigh seemed to break out in the gloomy underground space. It was quiet in the sword jail. The air seemed to have solidified into the rocks, which were even harder than the rocks on the Shangda Peak. The two figures in the heavenly arrival state walked past slowly, bringing a tremendous mental pressure to the large demons and deviant practitioners in the cells on the two sides. Though they couldn't hear the footsteps, they could hear the drum beats in their hearts, one louder than the other. When they arrived at the deep end of the sword jail, Fong Jingtian halted his steps and looked at the cell at the end of the gloomy passage, asking, "Did you lock my master up here?" Jingjiao uttered, "Hmm." Fong Jingtian asked, "Who is locked up in there?" "You're not the sect master, so you're not qualified to know," said Jingjiao. Fong Jingtian pulled back his line of sight and continued walking forward. There was only one other passage in the sword jail besides this narrow and lonely dead-end passage. It was the only way to get in and out of the Hermit Peaks. There was no other way. It was said that this was the intention of the grandmasters of the previous generation of the Aoyama sect to set up the Hermit Peaks. Only in a hopeless situation could one be reborn. Only when one was in a hopeless situation could he break through the seemingly impossible barrier on the arduous path of cultivation. In the entire cultivation circle, only 4 people knew that there was another way out of the Hermit Peaks. Lu Xi and Yuan Qijing were dead, and Jingjiao and Taiping wouldn't tell anybody else about this secret. The scenery in the Hermit Peaks was very beautiful, so beautiful that it did not seem like the real world. However, it was interesting that they could see in the real world, or, to be exact, on the top of Tingguang Peak. Fong Jingtian had lived in the Hermit Peaks for many years, and it was also here that he had successfully broken the deadly barrier that Yuan Qijing had set for himself and reached the heavenly arrival realm in the wildflowers. Those beautiful green mountains swept past at high speed, and in front of him was the mountain he was most familiar with. The mountain was still full of blooming wildflowers. Fong Jingtian landed on the mountain and walked into the depths of the wildflowers. He bent down and picked up a bamboo flute. The bamboo flute left the ground, and the wildflowers gradually withered, turning into fragments that mixed with the black soil and disappeared. He turned to look at Jingjiao and said, "Speaking of which, when I didn't know your identity, I once thought of taking you as my disciple." The mountain breeze blew through the holes of the bamboo flute, producing a pleasant sound. It was about 150 years ago when Jingjiao returned to Aoyama and participated in the inherited sword competition by the stream of sword washing. "Hurry up," said Jingjiao. The upcoming fight would affect the inheritance of the Aoyama sect for hundreds of years, or even more years, and the whole of Chaotian. Before the fight, he could reminisce about the past, feel sentimental, exclaim, and talk a lot. But it was unnecessary. He finally had a chance to express his emotions that had been suppressed for hundreds of years, but they were interrupted in such a manner. Fong Jingtian was not upset, but sighed. "If you were really the senior master, Why would my master teach someone as boring as you back then? I'm talented, said Jingjiao. After a moment of silence, Fong Jingtian asked, how should we fight? Jingjiao said, the losers shouldn't come out. This was the rule of the Hermit Peaks of Aoyama to begin with. Those who entered the Hermit Peaks had only one way to get out, to break through the heavenly arrival state, or to be ignored by Jingjiao and Yuan Qijing like Tong Yin and the others. Of course, even if Fong Jingtian lost the fight and was imprisoned in the Hermit Peaks, he still had another way to get out, which was to ascend. Fong Jingtian remarked sentimentally, his silvery eyebrows ruffling slightly. Your self-confident and annoying look is indeed similar to that of Senior Master. Jingjiao said, even your master doesn't doubt my identity anymore, but you still don't believe me. Why didn't I notice that you were such a stubborn child when you were little? Fong Jingtian said, it's because I was still a child in your eyes at the time, so I had to be stubborn when I saw many things from the sidelines. Jingjiao said, since you're still a child, how could you tell the truth from the falsehood and know what the truth is? Fong Jingtian said, I only know that apart from little sister, you and my two big brothers are the ones my master loves the most. But what have you done? Jingjiao said, we did what we should do. No, we did what we wanted to do. Fong Jingtian said while staring into his eyes, I want you to die. No sooner had he finished speaking than a dozen white marks suddenly appeared in the blue sky of the Hermit Peaks. Those sword marks combined to form a plum blossom. It was either a plum blossom or a plum blossom, bare and without a bud. Those marks were all sword wills. They pierced through heaven and earth. The people of Oyama sect stood on the square in front of the grand hall of Shilai Peak, listening to the rustling of the pines and looking at the sky blankly, not knowing where Jingjiao and Fong Jingtian had gone. Zhao Leu felt the weight in her bosom lighten and found that Ada was nowhere to be found. She looked at the distant Shanghai Peak reflexively. Guanyin Jinren had sensed the commotion a while ago, a hint of worry flashing in his eyes. Since Jingjiao and Fong Jingtian had gone to Shanghai Peak, it meant that they would go to the Hermit Peaks. Going to the Hermit Peaks meant that this fight would be different from the sword fight between him and his big brother. It would be a real fight to the death. On the top of Qingrong Peak, Nan Wang didn't drink alcohol for once. She wore shoes and stood under a flowering tree, looking in the direction of Shanghai Peak, her small face full of anger and helplessness. She knew that Jingjiao and the others had returned to Aoyama, but they didn't show up because they wanted to interrupt this fight in secret. It was better not to mention that they knew their limits. Though her cultivation state was inferior to that of Fong Jingtian and Jingjiao, she had other ways to interrupt this fight. It seemed that Jingjiao and Fong Jingtian had guessed what she would do, so they went to the Hermit Peaks directly. There was only one passage in the Hermit Peaks, and the dead dog was guarding it. She couldn't get in there, so she had no way to interrupt this fight. The flowering tree shook slightly, and countless fine sword marks appeared on the black rocks. Those marks floated up into the air and turned into sword strings, forming an invisible bridge. Her dress and the silvery bell rang slightly. She stepped on a bridge and landed on the top of Tianguang Peak. The people in front of Shilai Peak came back to their senses after sensing the sword strings in the sky. They leapt up on their swords and headed toward Tianguang Peak. A corner of the Hermit Peaks could only be seen from the top of Tianguang Peak in Aoyama, which was thousands of miles away. Countless sword lights illuminated the sky and retreated to Tianguang Peak. The crowd had no time to bow to Nan Wang at the edge of the cliff and looked in the direction of the Hermit Peaks. They could only vaguely see a corner of the Hermit Peaks, which were countless green mountains in the ocean of clouds. But they couldn't see the figures of Jingjiao and Fong Jingtian at all. There was a muffled boom. The crowd was startled. They turned to the source of the sound and found some dust falling off the stone monument on the back of the round turtle, wondering what was going on. The fight in the Hermit Peaks should have started by now. But why did the stone monument produce some commotion when they couldn't see any scene? Some disciples who had just entered the sect for a short time couldn't help but wonder if the ancestors of the Aoyama sect were infuriated because they couldn't bear to see the infighting. Who do you think will win? Nan Wang's voice suddenly burst out from the edge of the cliff. The crowd eyed each other in bewilderment, thinking that they wouldn't dare to voice their thoughts even if they had the same idea. Those two guys only cared about their own happiness, but they didn't think about how much trouble they would bring to Aoyama. What a headache, Nan Wang said. Who knows how long the fight will last? Are we just going to watch from here? Why don't we make some bets and enjoy the show? Her voice was very calm and emotionless, but anyone could tell that she was in a very bad mood. It was filled with the dejection of defeat and the smell of breaking a jar. It was still quiet at the edge of the cliff. No one dared to cater to her mood. A moment later, Zhao Lei walked to the side of Nan Wang, called out the thoughtless sword, and put it on the ground. Chapter 665. Nobody expected Zhao Lei to bet on the thoughtless sword. As for who she bet on, the answer was obvious without a second thought. Soon after, Yuan Chu and Ping Yongka walked over. The sword Yuan Chu took out was the nameless strange gray sword. Ping Yongjian searched his body for a long time, and finally took out a flatbread given to him by Opiao, feeling embarrassed. Zhuo Ruzhui coughed twice and pretended to search his body for a long time. In the end, he took out a golden leaf. This was an extremely shabby bet, not even as good as the flatbread given by Ping Yongka. The gentle wind kept blowing on the top of Tianguang Peak, and so did the sound of footsteps. With Zhao Lei taking the lead, more and more people placed their bets. The elders of the peaks were very prudent, so they wouldn't allow them to fool around. Even though Nan Wang had spoken, most of the participants in the gambling game were the disciples of the third generation. Surprisingly, all of them bet on Jing Jiao. Nobody thought Fang Jingtian would win. The elders of Shilai Peak fell silent. Even if they wanted to win some face, what could they offer that was equal to the thoughtless sword? Looking at Nan Wang's left hand, which was full of swords, flatbread, and a golden leaf, and then her right hand, which was empty, Guang Yunjinren couldn't help but sigh. Even though Jing Jiao had entered the heavenly arrival state in Zhaoga City, he hadn't been in the heavenly arrival state for a long time. How could he be a match for Fang Jingtian, a swordsman in the middle state of the heavenly arrival state? The reason was simple. The immortal Jingyang had never lost. Jing Jiao hadn't lost either. Jing Jiao had participated in many fights over the last 100 years. He fought against Gu Qing at the inherited sword competition, Ma Hua and Gu Han at the sword trial, the young talents of the cultivation circle at the plum meeting, the Dao competition, and the fights between the swordsmen later on. At the beginning of these battles, no one thought highly of him, but he won all of them. He had long earned the title of invincible in the cultivation world. Thinking that he was the reincarnation of perfected Jingyang, he gave off a feeling of invincibility. Now, as long as he participated in a battle, no one would be optimistic about his opponent, even if his opponent today was Fang Jingtian. The battle between Fang Jingtian and Guang Yuanjinren for the position of the sect leader was peaceful and peaceful. It ended quickly because they were not fighting for life and death. All they needed to do was to determine the difference in cultivation level. However, the battle in the Hermit Peaks today was a battle of life and death. Even if there were differences in cultivation realms and cultivation, who would admit defeat? Nan Wang was right. They didn't know how long it would take for it to end. People stood on the top of Tianguang Peak and looked in the direction of the Hermit Peaks. They could not see anything, but they were still very nervous. Muffled sounds kept coming from the steel, which sounded like the beating of war drums. Dust rustled down, making people feel even more uneasy. The dusk grew thicker, and the night came again. The starlight grew brighter, washing the peaks and the drifting clouds among them like water. No one on the peak spoke. Some people gradually withdrew their gazes and looked at the scenery or their own hands, lost in thought. Zhao Lei looked up at the starlight in the sky. She suddenly found the starlight dimmed for a moment, so she turned her head to look at the steel reflexively. The round turtle had opened its eyes. A piece of starlight was hanging from the corner of its mouth, and it was swallowing it slowly. When it finished swallowing the starlight, it slowly turned its head to look in the direction of the hermit peaks. A hint of annoyance and pain appeared in its old and calm eyes. Perhaps it was because it felt sorry for those two guys who had ruined the family property of Aoyama too much. The starry sky in the hermit peaks was even more beautiful. The stars did not twinkle, as if they were eternally hanging in the night in silence. Countless traces appeared in the night sky, some winding, some straight, and some deep, but there was no sign of breaking. What was brighter were the sword lights, which kept shuttling, colliding, and dodging in front of the black curtain. Sometimes they burst into dazzling sparks, and sometimes they brushed past each other, like two ignorant and ruthless shooting stars that only wanted to destroy each other. This scene was extremely magical and dazzling. There was no chance to see it in the real world, so naturally, it couldn't be painted by a painter. Ada blinked his eyes. Those wonderful and magical sword lights and traces were all shattered by his blinking, and then they reappeared in his monstrous cat's eyes. He had no interest in appreciating such a beautiful scene. He was just a cold and ruthless spectator. The sword lights that bloomed like plum branches were still so fierce, not weaker than his claw with all his strength. The straight, boring, dull, fast, and ineffectual sword light was just flying around in such a boring manner. No one knew why he dared to fight with Fong Jingtian. Ada thought of these things, and a huge flame suddenly bloomed in his eyes. The two sword lights met again. Well, his situation seemed to be a little worse. No matter whether he admitted it or not, I'll say that you seemed to be dying at that time. What if I didn't help you? As the head of Aoyama, you have to accept my kindness. Make your move, Ada. Thinking that he, the principal guard, would be remembered in the history of the Green Mountain sect, Ada felt so happy that he was on the verge of fainting. He wagged his head with the wind and was about to leap into the night sky to sneak attack Fong Jingtian. Suddenly, a soft palm fell on his head and pressed him to the ground, making him unable to move. The palm was really soft and warm, and it felt very comfortable when it fell on his head. Ada, on the other hand, felt great fear. His pupils shrank to the size of beans, and his white hair stood on end. He uttered a cold and vigilant low cry. Damn it! Weren't you hundreds of miles away? How come you suddenly came here? Damn it! How come you become so powerful after hundreds of years? The sword lights, which were many times brighter than the stars, illuminated the hermit peaks. In comparison to the cracks in the sky, the ground of the hermit peaks was many times more miserable, with ravines 100 feet deep and 10 miles long everywhere. It was a scene of devastation everywhere. Dozens of peaks had been completely destroyed, but the outside of the manor caves in those peaks were still illuminated with green lights. If the two in the sky continued fighting, they wouldn't have any scruples at the critical moment of life and death. If the heaven and earth were to collapse, what would happen to those elders of the previous generation who were still behind death doors in the manor caves? The dead dog had been observing the fight in the hermit peaks in order to prevent such a thing from happening. He had sensed Ada's presence the moment he sneaked into the hermit peaks. Many years ago, Ada often came to the hermit peaks to cause trouble, so he was quite familiar with this place. But how could he be more familiar with it? Moreover, Ada had prepared a great deal over the years to guard against the cat. As such, as Ada was about to jump in the night sky and launch the most shameless and powerful sneak attack at Fong Jingtian, the dead dog raised his right front paw and pressed Ada down. A huge dog as large as a black mountain, and a small cat as large as a dandelion. The comparison of their body shapes and the scene were truly interesting. The dead dog didn't pay any more attention to Ada after pressing him down. He looked at the two sword lights in the night sky in silence. The straight sword light traveled at a high speed. He had never seen a faster sword light despite having stayed in Aoyama for so many years. Yet the sword light that was as zigzagging as a plum blossom was not bad either. Its sword wheels were zigzagging and indefinite. No matter how fast the straight sword light traveled, it was hard to locate its position. On the contrary, the dead dog was almost trapped by it a few times. Meow. A feeble meow of a cat could be heard in the peak. The dead dog lowered his head to look at the white cat under his paw, his eyes calm and warm, but his willpower was quite determined. I know Jingjio is the sect master, but I can't get involved in this fight. Neither can you. Ada knew that the dead dog hadn't learned the two-mind connection from Taiping Jinren, so he cursed the dead dog several times in his mind, wondering how many disciples of Aoyama the dead dog and the devil rooster had killed by that pair of brothers. Then, Ada meowed loudly and confidently again. The dead dog tilted his head slightly, bringing up a gust of night wind. He looked at Ada in surprise, wondering why he was hungry. Ada meowed twice, indicating that he was extremely hungry. The dead dog lowered his head and held Ada in his mouth after some thought. He leapt up in the night wind and arrived in front of a distant mountain noiselessly. This mountain was different from the other mountains in the Hermit Peaks. It was a barren, rocky mountain devoid of wild grass and trees. There were many caves among the cliffs. There was a stone statue in each of the caves. Each of the stone statues was a swordsman of Aoyama who had failed to break through the state and died in the Hermit Peaks. Chapter 666. There was a soft clap. Ada landed on the ground and raised his right hind leg. He sniffed his body carefully and only relaxed after confirming that there was no smell of saliva. When it raised its head and saw the mountain, it couldn't help but jump in fright. When it came to the Hermit Peaks to play, it had rummaged through this stone mountain many times, but when did you change your diet? The corpses of the Aoyama elites did not contain any heaven and earth yuan qi, but their blood, flesh, tendons, and bones still contained sword will, which was a great supplement. However, this was against the rules of the Aoyama sect. He shot a gloomy glance at the dead dog, wondering how he could act so recklessly after Yuan Qijing was dead. It was true that the dead dog didn't know the two-mind connection, so he didn't know what this cat was thinking about. He walked to the side of the rocky mountain and dug a deep pit with his front paw. The corpse of a monster from the Snow Kingdom was buried in the pit. Just by looking at its appearance, one could tell that its rank was extremely high. Ada walked to the edge of the pit and took a look. He meowed in disgust. The expression in the dead dog's eyes changed slightly, as he thought that this was a treasure he had kept for himself. Why did he dislike it? After thinking for a moment, he walked to another area and dug out another corpse. This was the corpse of a swordsman of the underworld. His soul fire had all turned into broken crystals. He didn't know what it tasted like, but he was certain that it would be extremely helpful to his cultivation. The eyes in which Ada looked at the dead dog were full of sympathy and pity. I have a good life at Shima Peak. I can drink spicy food, and I can even step on. TSK. You're still eating these things when you're living like this? The dead dog shot a puzzled glance at him. Ada meowed, indicating that he was suddenly not hungry anymore. The dead dog didn't think too much about it. He lowered his head and ate half of the corpse of the swordsman of the underworld, and then buried it carefully. He didn't forget to bury the corpse of the monster of the Snowy Kingdom as well. It was dawn, then it went dark. It was dawn, then it was dark again. The sword light stopped. The pit was dug out. Then it was filled up. He dug it again. It was filled up again. There was no food left. Dust continued to fall from the stone monument on Tianguang Peak, but the intervals between each fall were getting longer and longer. Some of the Aoyama disciples left and returned to bring fruits to their masters. The immortals of Aoyama were not afraid of hunger, but they were afraid of boredom. Lying in the mouth of the dead dog, Ada looked at the distant sky through his teeth that were as big as stone pillars, wondering why the dead dog didn't let him out now that the victor had been decided. His white robe fluttered lightly, much more vivid than the clouds in the sky. Jingjio landed on the mountain, lowered his body, and stuck the bamboo flute back into the soil. Thin green branches drilled out from the holes of the bamboo flute, swaying in the wind as they grew. Soon they spread out, and then small white flowers bloomed in twos and threes, followed by a sea of flowers that covered the entire mountain. Fong Jingtian lay in the sea of flowers, panting heavily. He no longer had the sage-like demeanor. He looked like a seriously ill old man. Among the mighty ones of the Aoyama sect, Guang Yunjinren was known for being quiet and low-key. However, he was the one who looked the least like an immortal. Since many years ago, he had been like a regular rich man. No matter how his two thin and long silvery eyebrows fluttered, they couldn't wash away the tackiness on him. The tackiness was not the usual tackiness. It was the homely and lively feeling related to the human world. From this point of view, Taiping Jinren had so many disciples, but Jing Jiao was the one who looked the most like an immortal. In comparison to Guanyin, Nan Wang, and the other disciples who joined the sect later, Jing Jiao had stayed at Shanghai Peak longer, so he had a deep impression of his master. It was for these reasons that he was more loyal to Taiping Jinren than to the others, and he hated Jing Jiao and the others even more. F***ck your ancestors, said Fong Jingtian, while looking at Jing Jiao. Jing Jiao said, though the sword pill is broken, it doesn't mean that it can't be cultivated again. I've seen someone cultivate again with a broken golden pill in the snowland. It should be the same method. Do you want to learn it? F***ck your great-grandmother, said Fong Jingtian. As if he hadn't heard Jing Jiao, Jing Jiao continued calmly. Of course, there's something wrong with your sword ghost. It's showing signs of dispersing. If you want to recover, you'll need more than 200 years. You should be able to hold on until that day. F***ck your mother, said Fong Jingtian. Just stay here and treat your wounds. Try your best to stay alive. It's never good to die. Looking at the sky, Jing Jiao said, we'll meet again soon. F***ck you, said Fong Jingtian while gasping for breath. No, said Jing Jiao. Having said that, Jing Jiao left the Hermit Peaks. Coming to the passageway of the sword jail, Jing Jiao stopped at a certain place, turned around, and looked at the cell at the end of the quiet passageway on his left, and suddenly sat down cross-legged. A great many formidable sword wills were hidden in the passageway, which were set up by Jing Jiao many years ago. Even he himself couldn't withstand them, but the situation had changed. In the cell, the snow girl squatted on the bamboo chair, looking at the fake icy peaks and snowland. She knew that Jing Jiao had arrived, but she had no intention of turning around. After a long while, she seemed to have sensed something, a gleam flashing in her dark pupils. She turned around slowly and looked at the stone door of the cell. Their gazes met in the air through the stone door of the cell, and then countless invisible turbulence occurred. Jing Jiao and that person in the cell had sat silently and faced each other a few times, and Jing Jiao had always been at a disadvantage during those times. But it was a bit different today. This should be the first time he could talk to her as an equal since he met her on the cold mountain. Of course, this was merely an equal attitude, and it didn't mean that he had the same ability as her. The snow girl suddenly made 2 gurgling sounds. You've grown stronger after 100 years, so I'll give you enough respect. Since you want to exchange, let's exchange. Jing Jiao said, the bamboo chair has decayed 100 years ago. Why should I exchange it for the fairy energy in my body? The snow girl stopped talking and turned around to look at the patch of icy peaks and snowland that hadn't changed at all. Jing Jiao said, do me a favor a few days later, and you'll be doing yourself a favor. The snow girl lifted her head slowly to look at the stone wall. It was Shangda Peak above the stone wall. It was the sky above Shangda Peak. What was above the sky? She made 2 gurgling sounds. Jing Jiao came out of the well with the help of the sunlight. He leapt up in the wind and snow and left the peak. The top of Tianwang Peak was filled with people. Countless gazes were fixed on Jing Jiao. He came out of the Hermit Peaks alone, so the outcome was clear. The elders and disciples of Shilai Peak had pale faces, and those who supported Fong Jingtian on the other peaks had a terrible look on their faces. Guang Yuanjinren had mixed feelings, but before he could ask, Nan Wang beat him to it. You didn't really kill him, did you? She asked while staring at Jing Jiao. Guang Yuanjinren hastily said to Nan Wang, since heaven and earth couldn't sense him, Big Brother's life is not in danger. Nan Wang said, when he broke through the heavenly arrival state in the Hermit Peaks, Heaven and earth couldn't sense him. How can you be so sure? Jing Jiao was annoyed, so he said, he's not dead. Fang Jingtian's injuries were so severe that he was only one step away from death, and he wouldn't be able to recover without several hundred years. Besides, he wouldn't be able to leave the Hermit Peaks except for ascension, which was not much different from death. Hearing this, Nan Wang didn't say anything. We pay our respects to the immortal sect master. Everyone on Tianguang Peak knelt down, including the elders and disciples of Shilai Peak. Jing Jiao said something to Zhao Liu, then leaped up into the air and flew toward Shima Peak. Yuan Shu was shocked when he heard what Jing Jiao said, wondering if he really had to deal with it in this way. No matter how shocked he had to deal with it, since he was Zhao Liu's disciple. As the saying goes, when the teacher is in trouble, the disciple will take care of it. Yuan Shu walked up to Jin Sadeo, the Yunqing Peak Master, and said seriously, "Big brother, get ready." Jin Sadeo was feeling uneasy because Fang Jingtian had been defeated by the immortal sect leader. "What?" he asked with a frown. The immortal sect leader said by the stream of sword washing the other day that younger brother Ping Yongka would take over the Yunqing Peak Master. Yuan Shu cleared his throat and said, "According to the rules of the sect, you need to do a handover." Hearing this, there was an uproar, and Jin Sadeo's face looked unsightly. A boom came from the distant Shima Peak. Jing Jiao returned to the lonely peak. The sword formation that isolated the outside world suddenly disappeared, and countless sword wills combined with the chi of heaven and earth, turning into misty arrows that seemed to be real, shooting out in all directions. At the moment, Shima Peak seemed to be setting off countless fireworks, showing off its greatness to the whole world. Chapter 667. Yesterday, before Fang Jingtian fell down, he said a few words, but they all disappeared after I sent them out. Then, in the main text, it became Jing Jiao talking to himself. I couldn't do anything about it. After I sent it out, Hai Tang reminded me that it might become an asterisk. So I added a dot in the middle, but it disappeared completely. Well, now you should have figured it out. What a pity that his words were not pleasant to hear, but it was a good picture. Hearing what Yuan Shu said, Jin Sadeo looked terrible, and so did the elders and disciples who supported Fang Jingtian. But Ping Yongka looked the worst. Of course, he remembered what his master had said at the stream of sword washing. The problem was that he had never taken those words seriously. The peak master of sword must be an important figure in the Aoyama sect. How could he be qualified to be the peak master? Not to mention his seniority in the 9 peaks of Aoyama, he was just the last disciple of the Shinma Peak. If he suddenly became the peak master, what would Senior Master Ant think? What would Big Brother Gu Qing think? What would Yuan Shu think? Big Brother Zhuoruzhui would be furious. And what if Apyao lost her temper? He was nervous and at a loss. He didn't know what to say. He wanted to refuse, but he didn't dare. "If it were you, I would accept it," Jin Sadeo said while looking at Zhao Liu. "But why should I give him the position of the peak master? Just because he is the last disciple of the immortal sect master? When Big Brother Lu Ci was here, he didn't do anything to Zhuoruzhui, no matter how much he doted on him. Zhuoruzhui didn't wait for him to finish. He said with drooping eyelids, 'Don't talk about me. Otherwise, I will ask Senior Master for advice.'" Jin Sadeo snorted coldly, but didn't say anything else. Though his seniority was not low, and his cultivation in the middle state of the Broken Sea was high, he was still no match for Zhuoruzhui. Anyway, why should he? He looked at Zhao Liu and continued, "I won't accept it." To say nothing of Jin Sadeo and those elders and disciples who supported him. Even Mo Chi, Mei Chi Yin, and the others felt it was inappropriate, not to mention Jin Sadeo and those elders and disciples who supported him. The main reason was that Ping Yongka had only stayed in Aoyama for a short period of time. Although he had 2 stunning performances 100 years ago, he was still not qualified enough to be a peak master. Those elders and disciples of Yunqing Peak were even more unwilling to serve such a person as their master. They looked at him rather unkindly. Under those gazes, Ping Yongka was a little nervous. He looked pitifully at Zhao Liu, but he didn't receive any support. He couldn't help but feel extremely regretful. He thought to himself, why did his surname have to be Ping? In the end, everyone had to ask themselves why. Then, why don't we have a fight? He looked at Jean Sadeo and asked. Hearing this, Jean Sadeo couldn't help but be stunned, wondering if all the young people of Shinma Peak were so arrogant. Even if I'm not a match for Zhao Liu and Zhuoruzhui, it's still a piece of cake for me to deal with you. Are you sure? Yes. There was an uproar in the crowd. Even though he had received confirmation, Jean Sadeo still didn't believe this matter could be settled so easily. He looked at Zhao Liu. Zhao Liu said, I'm the master of Shinma Peak. The meaning of this statement was clear. She wouldn't care anyway. In the eyes of Jean Sadeo and the others, since she didn't care, the immortal sect master, who was so lazy, wouldn't care either. Taking a deep breath, Jean Sadeo said, Okay. Hardly had he finished speaking when a man appeared in front of him. The pine trees rustled in the wind. It was unusually quiet in front of the hall of Shilai Peak. Seeing this scene, people's eyes were full of disbelief. Ping Yongka placed his right hand on Jean Sadeo's neck. Does this count as your defeat? He asked with uncertainty and bewilderment. Jean Sadeo's face turned extremely pale and then turned purple. This is a sneak attack, he said in a trembling voice. Ping Yongka said embarrassedly, Sorry, I'm a bit nervous. Having said that, he retreated to the side of Zhao Liu without any visible movement. He had covered a distance of 100 feet in an instant, without leaving any residual shadow or making any sound of wind, as if he hadn't moved at all. Seeing this, the crowd was stunned again, wondering what kind of movement this was. Those who had witnessed Ping Yongka's performance at the sword trial and the plum meeting more than 100 years ago knew that this was the legendary shapeless sword body. Jing Jiu, Zhao Liu, and Ping Yongka were the only 3 people in the whole of Aoyama and the whole cultivation world who had mastered this ability. Jean Sadeo took another deep breath to suppress his anger, nervousness, and frustration. He didn't dare to be careless. He called out his flying sword, ready to employ the most powerful move of the old bird sword style of Yunqing Peak. The flying sword looked very faint in the sky, like an ice cube that could disappear at any moment. It was the famous sword of Aoyama, the absolute emptiness. Ping Yongka thought that he wouldn't be able to approach him as easily as before since his opponent was well prepared this time. He couldn't help but feel more nervous. Crack! The pine trees seemed to have been cut off by an invisible barrier. The absolute emptiness sword rose up along with the wind, bringing along a dozen agile sword lights, heading toward Ping Yongka. Ping Yongka leaned forward reflexively and dashed in that direction. With a thudding sound, the dust on the ground rose slightly. In the next moment, he came before Jean Sadeo again and placed his right hand on Jean Sadeo's neck. The sword lights were emitting from his clothes and black hair, and his fingers exuded a faint, formidable sword will. The absolute emptiness sword was still in the sky. The old bird sword style hadn't been formed yet, let alone attacking. It became even quieter in the square. The crowd couldn't believe what they had just seen. Jean Sadeo's face was full of astonishment and indignation. His lips trembled slightly, but he couldn't utter a word. Does this count as my win? Ping Yongka asked him seriously. Jean Sadeo reached out his hand to call back the absolute emptiness sword and put it into his empty left hand. He turned around and walked toward the outside of the square. He didn't turn his head around no matter how the elders and disciples of Yunqing Peak shouted at him. A peak master in the middle state of the Broken Sea realm had been humiliated by a young disciple who had been in the sect for more than 100 years. How could he have the face to stay on the square? It was highly likely that he had been provoked and wanted to go to the Hermit Peaks to keep Fong Jingtian company. Ping Yongka wondered why Jin Sadeo was still so angry if it wasn't a sneak attack. He turned his head timidly to look at Zhao Liu, wondering what he had done wrong. Zhao Liu looked at him, her eyes full of the image of herself when she was young in the Sword Peak. A hint of appreciation showed up in her eyes as she said, "You're pretty good." A few iron eagles suddenly flew up from the distant Sword Peak, giving off a rare cry. The clouds and fog dispersed slightly, and dozens of sword wheels rose up joyfully, as if they were welcoming something. Yuan Chu walked up to him and looked at the absolute emptiness sword in his hand enviously, asking, "You're pretty good. What state are you in now?" "I don't know," replied Ping Yongka with a puzzled expression. He really didn't know what state he was in at the moment. He had thought he would definitely lose if he fought with Jin Sadeo, and his master would blame him for not being the peak master of the Sword Peak. Unexpectedly, he won. Hearing this answer and thinking of what they had seen, the crowd was shocked, speechless again, wondering what kind of place the Shinma Peak was on Earth. The fight between Ping Yongka and Jin Sadeo took only a short time, and there was no dazzling scene. But the disciples of Aoyama all practiced swordsmanship, so they understood what Ping Yongka's two close approaches meant. As for the more important sword fight, which was related to the position of the leader of Aoyama, no one was there to witness it. Zhao Liu thought that Jing Jiu used this fight to familiarize himself with the state of heavenly arrival, but others thought it took him a few days to finish the fight because the fight was so intense. A few days were enough for the dead dog to eat up the delicious food he had kept for many years, enough for Ada to curse him 3,000 times in his mind, and enough for Gu Qing to come back from Zhaoga City. The small charcoal stove was lit again, and the silver charcoal had gradually turned silver. The water in the iron kettle had gradually boiled, and it was time to put the tea leaves in. The content of his narration had finally returned to the inside of Aoyama's sect from the imperial court. The Zhongzhou school has some complaints about the distribution of resources by the imperial court, but there is nothing they can do about it. The specific distribution of resources on the mountain is still done by Qingguang Peak and carried out by Shuriwa Peak. However, this disciple has some doubts that Guinan Shan has handed over Liangwang Peak to Guhan and the others. He has done things fairly, but he has too much power in his hands, lying on the bamboo chair and enjoying the comfortable autumn sun. Jing Jiu raised his hand to indicate that he had no interest in this matter. Gu Qing understood what Jing Jiu meant and didn't say anything more. He picked up the teapot and started to serve the tea. There were 3 teacups in the teapot. Jing Jiu gave the first one to himself because it was a bit unfamiliar. He gave the second one to his master because it was just right, and he gave the third one to Zhao Liu because she had a strong taste. At the moment, there were only 3 of them by the cliff's edge. Yuan Chu, Ping Yongka, and Ap Yao were talking about something in the Daoist hall. It was unclear what they were talking about, but it was quite noisy. Jing Jiu took the teacup and had a sip, asking, "Have you settled the matter on your side?" Chapter 668. Though Jing Jiu asked the question casually, Gu Qing felt a sudden clap of thunder in his mind. His hand holding the teacup froze, and he said in a low voice, "I haven't told Zhen Tao yet. I can't say it out loud." Zhao Liu glanced at Jing Jiu, wondering why he was so concerned about the relationship between a man and a woman. Jing Jiu didn't notice her gaze and continued, "Keep it a secret then, until she or you die." Zhao Liu glanced at him again, wondering what kind of nonsense he was talking about, but she refrained herself from saying anything. Jing Jiu continued, "I asked you to come back this time to prepare for the inauguration ceremony of the sect master. You could go back to Zhaoga City after that." Gu Qing was very concerned about his master's affairs. He and Yuan Chu had already sorted out the affairs of the inauguration ceremony of the sect master 100 years ago, but there was one troublesome matter that had to be dealt with in advance. According to the sect rules, master, you have to take out the inherited heaven sword. Noticing that Jing Jiu's expression didn't change, he continued, "In my opinion, we should amend the sect rules in advance." As far as Jing Jiu was concerned, The inherited heaven sword was the most threatening existence. Back then, he was forced out of Aoyama by Fong Jingtian and the others because he didn't want to take out the sword. It doesn't matter, Jing Jiu said. The sheath is in my hands. Nobody can take it away from me. Gu Qing thought it was reasonable. His master was a figure in the heavenly arrival state, and Fong Jingtian was no match for him. Besides, he had the sword formation of Aoyama. Who in the world could take the inherited heaven sword away from him? Now that he had to do something, he had to do it as soon as possible. Jing Jiu drank all the tea in the teacup and went to the Taoist hall to discuss with Yuan Chu. Soon, Ping Yongka walked out from the Taoist hall. Judging from the way he kept turning his head around, it seemed that he was driven out. Master! He walked to the bamboo chair and touched his head, looking nervous. Finally, he plucked up his courage and said, Are you really going to let me go to the Sword Peak? Jing Jiu did not speak. Zhao Liu said he didn't go to Tingguang Peak even after he became the sect leader. Ping Yongka understood and couldn't help but be overjoyed. He quickly picked up the iron pot and filled their cups, saying, But I don't know anything. I really don't know how to be a peak lord. Zhao Liu said, Neither will I. And do you think you will be the sect leader? Jing Jiu glanced at her and knew that it was because of the conversation he had with Gu Qing. Ping Yongka did not understand the undercurrent between the two masters. He scratched his head and said in distress, But I don't even know the old bird swordsmanship. How could they? Hardly had he finished speaking when Jing Jiu took out a booklet and threw it to him, asking, Anything else? Ping Yongka took out the empty sword and said reluctantly and helplessly, If I don't use the sword, what should I do with it? Jing Jiu said, Whatever. Ping Yongka glanced at Zhao Liu and finally understood something. He hurriedly bowed and left, running back to the Taoist hall. Not long after, mocking laughter came from the Taoist hall, saying that he had poor eyesight and was ignorant. The air on Shima Peak became relaxed. Zhao Liu sat at the end of the bamboo chair with the teacup in her hand and asked, Which of the two things should we deal with first? Jing Jiu said, The Zhongzhou school has experienced so many things, so they should be smarter. They won't do anything until I fight him to the death. So I have to deal with him first. The quiet mountain village was filled with the smell of cut straws. The scattered houses and the red lanterns hanging high up in the air diluted the feeling of living in the mountains, giving off an aura of wealth and decadence. Insen took a bath in the mountain stream and returned to the farmhouse. He chatted with the short and thin old man for a while and then returned to his own hut. The furnishings in the hut were very simple. There was only an oil lamp, which was cut very short to save money. The flame was as small as a bean, making the hut very dim. The great Grand Master of the mysterious dark sect sat on the bed with the flame in his eyes as small as a bean. Immortal. Even if he wants to experience the world of mortals and understand the true meaning, why does he have to live such a hard life? I've been listening to the scriptures in the Guochang Temple for many years, but I'm not interested in experiencing the world of mortals. We are indeed similar in this respect. San draped the wet towel over the back of the chair and said with a smile, I just want to know how he has lived his life in this life. The great Grand Master of the mysterious dark sect stroked his sparse hair and said with a rare hint of mockery, It's said that he has learned everything in only 9 days. Don't you think you've stayed here for too long? You mean my talent is not as good as his? San pushed over a bowl of water and served it as tea. I've done all these things before, whether it's chopping firewood or harvesting grain. It's just that I've been busy with cultivation, doing great things, and helping the common people that I've gradually forgotten them. Do you really think I want to learn these things? The great Grand Master of the mysterious dark sect picked up the water and took a sip. He smacked his lips and said, Then what are you doing here? Can you find out what's going on with him in this life by doing these things? Insen pointed between his eyebrows and said, When I was in the stream just now, I suddenly understood one thing. The great Grand Master of the mysterious dark sect put the bowl of water back on the shabby table and asked solemnly while staring at him, What is it? Insan said, He has lived in the imperial palace since he was a child. After he was brought back to Aoyama by the great grandmaster, he has only been cultivating and has never done these things. Why does he want to do them? Other than adapting to his body, more importantly, he wants to walk on another path. Thinking of the rumors about Jingjio in the last 100 years, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect shook his head and said, I can't see any difference between him and the Jingyang of the past. This is what they call breaking down and building up. Even if nothing seems to have changed, it's still a whole new level, San said with a faint smile, or rather, Second River. What do you mean, immortal? The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect asked. He is drifting with the current in the Second River, but I shouldn't follow him and forget my own river. San said with a smile. He cultivates his path, and I destroy my world. That's right. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect suddenly sensed a bloody smell in the room. He sniffed and rubbed his nose a few times, saying, Since our paths are different, I'm afraid there will be some obstacles. Back then, Jing Yang led Yuan Qijing and Lu Xi to stab Tai Pingzhenren in the back. Why? No matter how lazy he was, no matter how indifferent he was to the mortal world, he had to wield his sword when facing the destruction of the world. The first time I went to the underworld was more than 700 years ago. San went on. I've prepared for it for so many years. I don't believe that he can predict everything. Even if he can't destroy the world. It's because this is my river. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect was fully aware that they had many followers of Tai Pingzhenren in Jiaoga City, Aoyama sect, and other major cultivation sects, even though they seemed to be homeless. However, even if all of them attacked at the same time, how could they destroy Chaotian? All of a sudden, a fluttering sound and a few gusts of night wind could be heard outside the room. The dark phoenix strode angrily into the room and said in a sharp voice, Feng Xiaoxi is such an idiot. He doesn't know how to endure humiliation. He has locked him up in the hermit peaks again. San got up and walked to the outside of the room. He looked at the distant peaks of Aoyama in the night sky, remaining silent for a long time. The short and thin old man had fallen asleep a long time ago, snoring blissfully and ignorantly. All of a sudden, a clamor could be heard somewhere in the village, along with a faint sound of cursing and crying. San didn't pay any attention to it. He remained silent while looking at the night sky. The dark phoenix flew to the top of the wall and looked at the distant ancestral hall. He knew what had happened, his long tail swaying a few times in a bored manner. The masters of the Liu clan caught a widow who had committed adultery with a tenant worker that night, and they were torturing her in the ancestral hall. It was believed that the adulterous couple would sink to the bottom of the pond when it was late at night. A righteous person enjoys abundant support, and an unjust person finds little support. I had thought back then whether I was a righteous person or a lost one. San suddenly said something that had nothing to do with Feng Jingtian and the ancestral hall of the Liu clan. Chapter 669. The Dark Phoenix spun his head around to look at Jingjio, not understanding what he intended to say. In fact, from the point of view of the cultivation practitioners, there is nothing wrong with my idea. But why are there so few people who support me? Is it because they are afraid of the unknown? No, it's because they have too many unknowns. San pulled back his gaze and looked at the distant ancestral hall of the Liu clan, saying, the cultivation practitioners who can't ascend usually leave behind their own descendants. Even my two good disciples are no exception. It's impossible for them to watch me kill all their clansmen and descendants. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect said while rubbing his head, it's quite normal. San shot him a glance and asked, what about you? The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect had a few decades left in his life, but he had no intention of leaving behind any descendants. I heard that Su Zai is doing quite well in the West, he said. The Dark Phoenix remarked in a mocking tone, you've placed your hope on a disciple who dared betray you. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect sneered. You're just a bird. You don't understand the meaning of human inheritance. With a smile, San continued. The ancestor of the Lu clan is the youngest brother of Lu Ci. Lu Ci arranged for his descendants to live in this small village so that they could avoid a calamity. All he wanted was for them to live on. Unexpectedly, Lu Shui appeared here. After Lu Ci's death, nobody took care of this place. As a result, this place has become what it is now. It's much worse than the Yuan clan in Lelong County. Hearing the conversation in the direction of the ancestral hall, the Dark Phoenix shook his head in disgust as he remarked, I don't even know why they live like this. San said, it's indeed meaningless and useless for mortals like them to live their lives aimlessly. Having said that, he crouched down and picked up a small pebble from the ground, and then flicked it out. The door of the farmhouse was closed. The small pebble landed on the door, making a faint pah sound. A crack appeared on the wooden plank of the door, which was caused by the splashing wooden splinters. The small pebble broke through the door and flew forward in the night sky, encountering the tree by the pond. Many years ago, Jingjiu had lain here and taught Lu Shui the mental cultivation method of Aoyama's sect. With another light pah sound, the tree bark split open and sawdust flew everywhere. A small hole had appeared. The pebble continued to fly forward. It flew over the paddy field that had been cut to the size of the great ancestor of the mysterious dark sect's head. They flew over the forest that was as messy as the tail feathers of a dark phoenix. A small hole appeared on the horizontal board of the ancestral hall, piercing through the light in the ancestral hall. Through the wails of widows whose clothes were in tatters, exposing their naked bodies. Through the righteous and malevolent gazes staring at her body. Through the feeble breathing of the dying tenant laborer lying in a pool of blood. They arrived at the deepest and highest part of the ancestral hall. There was an armchair there. The old master of the Lu clan was sitting on the chair. There was another light smack. A bloody hole appeared between Grandpa Lu's eyebrows. A stream of blood slowly flowed out. He slowly fell backwards. On the locust tree in Shangzhou, San had been smashing the rats for a whole day with small pebbles half as close in his hands, but none of them were killed. That was because he was unwilling. He was very good at killing people. As for whether he was willing or not, it depended on his mood at the time. Pa 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 pa. The small pebbles kept flying, leaving countless small holes on the plank of the door and countless white lines in the village under the night sky. There were no screams, but there were exclamations and the sound of running, which gradually became lower and then disappeared. Countless people were lying in pools of blood in the Lu clan's ancestral hall and various houses. San clapped his hands and looked into the distance in the night sky again. The 9 peaks of Aoyama were there. Shangda Peak was the 3rd peak, so I was called San. Shima Peak was the 9th peak, so you were called Jingjiu. This was a new life. You're stepping into a new river. But I shouldn't do this. I'm not San. I'm still the great river, flowing eastward with great momentum. Those who follow me and those who oppose me will perish. Let's go, he said softly. The Dark Phoenix didn't dare fly close to Aoyama. He landed on the ground and rushed forward as fast as a lizard. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect squatted down and carried him on his back. Aoyama was still on the other side of the darkness. They headed to the other side. He didn't look back. From this moment on, he was not San anymore. He was Tai Pingzhenren. By the time Lu Shui received the news and came back, it had already been a few days later. Bang! The lone sword turned into a flash of light and returned to his wrist, turning into a sword bracelet, quivering slightly to express his uneasiness. A few days had passed, but the smell of blood was still lingering in the village. Fortunately, the disciples of Aoyama arrived in time, so the corpses hadn't rotted yet. Hundreds of corpses were piled up in the rice fields, including men and women, old and young, with a bloody hole in the center of their eyebrows. It was a gruesome scene. The disciples of Aoyama, the yamen runners of the prefectures, and the officials of the Pure Heaven Bureau had all been cleared out. Zhao Liu squatted down in front of the corpses to check them. Lu Shui came up behind her and asked while clenching his fists, "Can we catch up with them?" Since the death of his parents, he hadn't come back to the small village and seen his relatives. Perhaps some of them had committed suicide, but what crime had those children committed? It's useless to catch up with them. Zhao Liu stood up and said, "Three swordsmen in the heavenly arrival state are traveling together. Unless the sword formation of Aoyama is employed, nobody can kill them." After a moment of silence, Lu Shui said, "I hope they won't grow old and die too soon." "I don't understand why they exposed their whereabouts near Aoyama," said Zhao Liu. "Is it because of Fang Jingtian, or does he hate the immortal Lu Ci that much?" "Neither," said Lu Shui while looking at the corpses in the rice fields. "This is a letter of challenge to my young master." The autumn wind rose. It was cool at first and then cold. Chaotian was on the brink of another winter. What had happened in Aoyama had spread throughout the land. People learned that Fang Jingtian had been defeated by Jing Jiao, and they also learned about the bloody incident in the village. It wasn't until then that the young disciples of the cultivation circle and the Aoyama sect finally understood why their masters were so alarmed when Taiping Zhenren was mentioned, and all they wanted to do was to kill him. This grandmaster was truly crazy. Nothing similar had happened in the following days. Taiping Zhenren, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect and the Dark Phoenix, had disappeared again, and the whole of Chaotian became peaceful. However, everyone in Zhaoga City and the various sects could sense the ominous aura in the autumn wind. Even the king of fire carps at the bottom of the cold mountain had a strong sense of danger. He swam toward the deep part of the lava river and felt a bit relieved when he arrived in front of the huge, transparent wall separating the human world and the underworld. The ominous aura and the warning came from the lethal intent hidden in the tranquility. It was like the calm before the storm, before the dawn, and before the destruction of the world. Everybody knew that Taiping Zhenren was going to do something, but where was he and what was he doing? The Aoyama sect sent out many disciples of Liangwang Peak to search along the banks of the muddy river. As for the rule that they couldn't leave the mountains until they reached the broken sea state, it was ignored by Guhan. For some reason, Jingjiao chose to ignore the rule as well. In the Battle of Zhaoga City 100 years ago, the curtain rollers of the imperial court and Bulo Lin cooperated with each other unintentionally. Since then, the two sides had maintained a semblance of peace, but the peace was broken this time. Under the instruction of Gu Qing, the curtain rollers had been collecting information in secret for more than 100 years. This time, they cooperated with the Pure Heaven Bureau to carry out another round of encirclement and suppression. Many remnants of Bulo Lin hiding in various sects and departments were exposed. From Zhaoga City to the Guoqing Temple and from the Thousand-Mile Wind Corridor to Yizhou, countless battles had taken place in the darkness of the night at the same time. Many people had died soundlessly, yet nobody could find Taiping Zhenren, not even a trace of his whereabouts. It seemed that he had vanished in a thin air. Spring came after the winter. A strong wind rose in the Thousand-Mile Wind Corridor. Unlike the previous years when people tried to avoid the wind, many sects and the representatives of the imperial court came to Yamatai against the wind this time. Jing Jiao had told Lu Shui in Zhaoga City that Bu Qiuxiao had something important to do, and it was a good thing. It was about becoming a saint. Chapter 670. The scholar of Yamatai becoming a saint was more important than the heavenly arrival state of Aoyama and the Deshang state of the center sect. Heaven and earth had shown various signs in advance. The strong wind was one of the signs. The lotus flowers bloomed in early spring this year, which was another sign. Xiaoyi picked a lotus leaf and rubbed the juice out of the lotus flower. After working for half a night, she had finally finished steaming the fragrant and sweet rice with lotus leaves. She carried the rice to Lu Shui happily. Because of the bloody case in the village, Lu Shui had been in a bad mood lately. Xiaoyi didn't know how to comfort him, so she paid extra attention to the food. Fortunately, unlike Jingjiao, Lu Shui was still interested in eating, so she didn't waste her effort. Seeing Lu Shui enjoying the food, Xiaoyi felt quite satisfied. She tidied up the paper and ink on the desk and walked to the window to check how long the amulet paper could last. The wind was too strong recently, so she had to use the amulet paper to set up a wind-shielding formation to avoid being disturbed. As for the inn she ran, it didn't have much business. No matter how good the place Gu Qing had chosen for her was, it couldn't withstand the disturbance of heaven and earth. She came to the window and saw a few green glows in the mountain ahead. Soon, she saw a few cultivation practitioners. "Someone from a Zhongzhou school has come here," she exclaimed with a slightly changed expression. Lu Shisui walked to the window and fixed his gaze on a thin and tall old man. After comparing his face with the files he had memorized on the cloud platform, he was certain of his identity. "Ren Qianzhu was in the upper limit of the Huashan state back then," he said, "but for some reason, he has broken through 3 states in a row and is now in the upper state of the Lianshu state." Hearing that he was a swordsman in the upper state of the Lianshu state, Xiaoyi asked nervously, "Isn't he an important figure in the Zhongzhou school?" Lu Shisui said, "The immortal Tan didn't like him before, but he has gained some power over the last few years. After the death of Yu Qianmen, he has a higher status on Cloud Dream Mountain. More than 100 years ago, Jing Jiu and Bu Qiuxiao reached an agreement in the old plum garden that Yamatai would no longer interfere in the matter of the throne. In the eyes of the Zhongzhou school, this was an act of betraying an ally. After that, the relationship between Yamatai and Zhongzhou school was not as close as before. Later, Bu Qiuxiao guarded Jingjiu in Zhaoga City for 10 years, and the two sides were on the verge of falling out. This time, the Zhongzhou school sent Ren Qianzhu to congratulate Bu Qiuxiao on becoming a saint. It was obvious that they wanted to repair the relationship between the two sections. The Aoyama sect had put too much pressure on the Zhongzhou school. As a result, Jing Jiu had defeated Fang Jingtian decisively after returning to Aoyama, which didn't cause too much internal strife in Aoyama. Thinking of this, Lu Shisui felt a bit relieved, saying, "No matter how hard the Zhongzhou school struggles, it's meaningless. They're no match for my young master." Xiaoyi thought that the immortals Tan and Bai were the most powerful figures in Chaotian. Well, she was used to Lu Shisui's blind trust or admiration for Jingjiu. She asked while blinking her eyes, "How about you and this Ren Qianzhu compared?" Lu Shisui said, "He is a senior elder of Zhongzhou school. I'm not as powerful as him, but I should be able to kill him with the help of the lone sword and the guard city pen." This was the entrance to the 1,000-mile wind corridor, but it was not heavily guarded. The sceneries of the mountains and rivers were quite beautiful, but the newly grown grass was flattened by the wind, looking a bit pitiful. It was thought that there would be many tourists here when the wind was not so strong. Ren Qianzhu waved his sleeve lightly to disperse the strong wind blowing in his face. Looking at the inn and the shops with their tightly closed doors, he was thinking of all this. They walked past the inn and along the river. It didn't take long for them to arrive by a lake. Countless waves were formed on the surface of the lake, stretching across the lake one after another. They looked quite formidable, and the sound of the waves was deafening. The willow trees by the lake were waving wildly in the wind, their leaves all falling off, and the bark of the willow branches was peeled off. The 1,000-mile wind corridor has a well-deserved reputation. It's said that the wind is stronger in the deep end of the wind corridor, and the dark energy of the underworld is as cold as the chaotic wind. The effect of cultivating there is almost the same as cultivating on the sword peak of Aoyama. Ren Qianzhu said to the accompanying disciples, "I've already sent a letter to the greenhouse. It will take some time. You guys stay here to cultivate and comprehend it." The disciples accepted the order and went to the forest to meditate and recuperate. Flutter, flutter. A red bird arrived against the wind and landed on a willow tree, lowering its head to comb its feathers. Standing under the tree, Ren Qianzhu looked at the huge waves on the lake, as if he hadn't noticed anything. The red bird lifted its head, its black eyeballs rolling slightly as it asked in the human language, "How is the situation at the bottom of the cold mountain?" Rin Xianzhu was still facing the surface of the lake, but his expression was much more respectful now. The free-traveling practitioner we arranged to go there has died inexplicably, and a magic treasure made of the scales has been destroyed, so we can't locate the fire carp, he replied. The red bird said, even if we can find a fire carp, we have to find a way to control it. Otherwise, it will be hard to destroy the barrier. Rin Xianzhu said with a grave expression, after the death of Yu Qianmin, Bai Zhenren trusted me more, but she was the only one who knew the way to control the fire carp. Even the immortal Tan didn't know it, so it's impossible for her to tell me. Let's forget about it then. The red bird flew up from the branch and flew with the wind, soon turning into a black speck and disappearing at the entrance of the windy corridor. Rin Xianzhu still didn't move. He looked at the huge waves on the lake in silence for a long time before pulling back his gaze. It turned out that he was also a subordinate of Bilo Lin. It was no wonder that Yu Qianmin was tracked down by Tai Pingzhenren when he went to Zhaoga City to take the heavenly retrieval orb last year and killed him. The little red bird flew to the entrance of the 1,000-mile windy corridor and landed on the eaves of the inn. The strong wind ruffled his feathers, and the color of his scarlet feathers looked quite adorable. He turned his head slowly to look at the deep end of the windy corridor. Yamatai was right there. Bu Qiuxiao would become a saint in a few days. Before that, the energy of heaven and earth here would undergo a drastic change. All Jingju needed to do was to injure Bu Qiuxiao's body at any moment, obtain his saint energy, and destroy the formation used by Yamatai to suppress the passage to the underworld. As a result, he would be able to send the strong wind to the underworld. The wind was the flowing energy, which had no destructive power. Even the cold and gloomy chaotic wind couldn't cause any harm to the underworld. What Jing Jiu wanted to do was to borrow the power of the wind. Only the strong wind could ignite the flames in the underworld river. What would happen if the burning underworld river encountered the endless seawater of the East Ocean and the bloody fog in the heavenly slaying formation? Jingzhou felt happy just thinking of the scene. The first problem he had to solve was how to get close to Bu Qiuxiao. If he followed Rin Xianzhu into Yamatai, he should be able to fool those scholars. But Rin Xianzhu couldn't get too close to Bu Qiuxiao. Thinking of all this, the little red bird paced back and forth on the eaves, making pa sounds. Pa, pa, pa. Xiaoyi looked up at the roof and said, the wind hasn't been this strong in previous years. The stones have all been rolled up. Listen, the wind is really strong. It's quite strong. Lu Shisui said, while looking at the paper on the table, holding the city guard pen in his right hand and the slightly trembling lone sword in his left. Xiaoyi didn't know what was going on, so she looked at him strangely. Lu Shisui remained in this posture for a long time. In the end, he chose to put down the pen and the sword in his hands. On the paper was an ancient prose poem he had copied, which said, "The righteousness enters the stars and the Han, and the scholars of the state are peerless." At this moment, he was thinking of another sentence. I wish I could be alone. If he were alone, he would never put down the city guard pen and the lone sword. Even if he would die in the fight later, he could at least inform his classmates in Yamatai and warn the teacher. The sound of the stones hitting and rolling on the roof suddenly stopped. Xiaoyi looked out of the window and found the wind was still blowing. She couldn't help but feel confused. With another paw sound, a tile on the roof was broken. The strong wind and sunlight poured in together, making a shrill whistle. The little red bird flew in and flapped its wings, making the sound of the wind disappear instantly. Along with a beam of clear light, the red bird landed on the ground and turned into a youth in red. Xiaoyi guessed his identity, and her face turned pale. She took a few steps back and stood beside Lu Shisui. Tai Pingzhenren said to her with a smile, I haven't thanked you for taking me to pick some lotus flowers that year. Today, I took my whole family on a journey. 10 people and 2 carriages. I feel very stressed. Chapter 671. Xiaohe was so nervous that she couldn't utter a word. All she could do was shake her head incessantly. It was unclear whether she meant to say no need to thank me, or I didn't want to help you, and I was forced to do it by you. Lu Shisui pulled her behind him and said to Tai Pingzhenren, "Tell me." Tai Pingzhenren walked to the desk and pulled out a chair to sit down. "Shouldn't you call me Grandmaster?" he asked Jingjiu with a seeming smile. Lu Shisui said, "I left by Rujing's sect a long time ago, and I have nothing to do with you." Tai Pingzhenren pressed, "What about Jingyang?" Lu Shisui retorted, "He is my young master. What does it have to do with you?" Tai Pingzhenren said with a smile, "You didn't threaten to kill me the moment we met. It looks like you have matured a lot after all these years." "I can't defeat you." Lu Shisui gave a simple and straightforward explanation. Tai Pingzhenren glanced at him twice before saying, "The problem of the alien jinqi in your body has been completely resolved. Your cultivation state is not lower than that of Zhao Liu and Zhuoruzhui. You are a truly powerful swordsman in the cultivation world. Don't you want to have a try?" Many years ago, Lu Shisui and Xiao He lived in the vegetable garden outside the Guoqing temple. They practiced the Buddhist methods according to Jingjiu's instruction in an attempt to suppress the alien jinqi in their bodies. It was at that time that he met Tai Pingzhenren for the first time and received many instructions from him. Of course, this didn't stop him from pursuing Tai Pingzhenren all the way from the Guoqing temple to Ozawa with Zhao Liu. "My young master couldn't kill you in Zhaoga City. Of course, I'm not as good as you." Lu Shisui's explanation was as simple and clear as ever. It was quite convincing. Tai Pingzhenren suddenly said, "Shall we eat first?" Years ago, in the vegetable garden outside the Guoqing temple, whenever he went to expound the scriptures for Lu Shisui, he would always eat a good meal and drink fine wine. Xiaohe looked at Lu Shisui with some fear. Lu Shidian stared at Tai Pingzhenren and nodded. Xiaohe plucked up her courage and stepped out from behind him. She walked away from the place where Tai Pingzhenren was sitting and headed downstairs. Tai Pingzhenren said, "If there are any more pickles, you might as well take more." Such a simple sentence almost scared Xiaohe to tears. Her legs were a little weak, and she walked down the stairs with difficulty, holding onto the wall. "Aren't you worried that she'll run away if I pester you?" Lu Shisui stared into Tai Pingzhenren's eyes and said, "The vixen is a sentimental person. You didn't attack me even though you were against her nature in order to keep her alive. How could she leave you to die alone?" Tai Pingzhenren stared at him, his eyes full of understanding and sympathy for the human heart. Looking at the ancient prose on the paper, Lu Shisui didn't say anything. Tai Pingzhenren said with a faint smile, "You're the first person Jingyang brought with him in this life, but I think you're more like me." "My young master has said so," said Lu Shisui. Tai Pingzhenren continued, "I've experienced many things from eliminating the demons at the Muddy River to betraying my sect and returning to Oyama. My young master has also said so," said Lu Shisui. Tai Pingzhenren asked, "Did he tell you in detail what I wanted to do?" Lu Shisui raised his head and looked at him, saying, "If you want to tell me the evilness of human heart through these experiences and persuade me to agree with your ideas, you shouldn't have killed everyone in the village." Tai Pingzhenren smiled and asked, "You don't think those people deserve to die?" Lu Shisui stared into his eyes and said, "It can't be everyone, and it can't be those ignorant children." Tai Pingzhenren said, "You're right. So I shouldn't say whether they deserve to die or not, but what does their death mean to heaven and earth?" Lu Shisui clenched his fists slightly and said, "You're a wise man, so you should know that it's meaningless to tell me these things." Tai Pingzhenren looked at him and said calmly, "You're a wise man, so you should know that it's meaningless to tell me these things. I didn't have a master, a companion, or a helper. Jingyang and the others weren't strong enough. The reason you can say these things to me today is because you're luckier than me. When you went through these troubles, Jingyang helped you. Otherwise, do you think you'd still be who you are now? If it weren't for Gu Qing asking the monkey to call for reinforcements after Lu Shisui ate the demon core at the bottom of the Muddy River and was imprisoned in the sword jail, If it weren't for Jing Jiu leading the Shinma Peak to resist Fong Jingtian's pressure after he returned to Aoyama. If it weren't for Jing Jiu helping him escape from the Hermit Peaks after he was imprisoned in the Sword Jail. If it weren't for Jing Jiu, there wouldn't have been Guocheng Temple in Yamatai. How much more hardships would he have gone through? If all these hardships were multiplied by 10 times, it would probably be as much as what Taiping Jinren had gone through back then. After a moment of silence, Lu Shui said, I know you've always wanted me to become someone like you. Many years ago, when he betrayed Aoyama, he was trusted by Shiwang's son and led to the cloud platform. This was what Taiping Jinren wanted. The immortal Taiping said, it's because I like to see how he feels when his most valued disciple becomes someone like me. You also wanted to kill Zhao Liu, Lu Shui said. Taiping Jinren said, that's right, because Zhao Liu is like a second Taiping Jinren. Lu Shui was a bit confused, so he asked, do you think it's interesting to play the role of a deity and influence the lives of people like us in secret? Why don't you ask him? Asked Taiping Jinren. Lu Shui said, my young master has never asked me to do anything. He only told me what might happen and let me make my own choice, whether it was back then or now. Taiping Jinren said with a smile, but in the end, you still can't get rid of our influence, whether it was back then or now. No, none of you can influence me. Lu Shui said, my young master once said that I'm stronger than you too. Though I don't know why I'm stronger, I believe in him. No matter what happened or what he heard, Taiping Jinren always wore that kind and clean smile on his face. It wasn't until now that he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows, ready to say something. It was then that Xiao He's timid voice came from the stairs. Why don't we talk after dinner? The dishes tonight were very sumptuous, second only to the time when Jing Jiu and Zhao Liu went to the vegetable garden of the Guocheng Temple. There were as many as 3 big bowls of pickled vegetables, which made one's mouth water. Taiping Jinren lifted his chopsticks and cut a piece of mud from the belly of the fish. He put it into his mouth and ate it happily. Do you know where the Dace Devils in the Muddy River came from? He asked in a muffled voice. Lu Shui suddenly became alert while holding his bowl, saying, I heard that they were driven here by the people of the underworld. Taiping Jinren scooped some vegetable and egg soup with a spoon and gulped it down. Then he asked, what about the secret method of the Bloody Demon Church next to the Devil Pill? Lu Shui put down his bowl and said while staring into Taiping Jinren's eyes, it was used by Shiwang's son to induce the disciples of Aoyama to rebel. Taiping Jinren picked up another piece of preserved meat and put it into his mouth, chewing it noisily. The branch of the old man, Nanchu, has been hiding on the foggy island all year round, he said. How could they find the secret method of the Bloody Demon Church? As for this method of inducing the disciples to rebel, don't you think it looks familiar? Well, this preserved meat is not bad. The pine and cypress branches are of the best quality. Lu Shui grew more and more fearful, asking, are those your methods? What can you do about it? Do you think the Devil Pill and the secret method of the Bloody Demon Church are so simple? Taiping Jinren put down his bowl, wiped his mouth, and took a sip of the strong tea. You should know that I used to be the chief monk of the Guocheng Temple, he said while looking at Jing Jiu. I know a little about the Buddhist methods. It was a humble statement to say that he knew a little about the Buddhist methods. The Buddhist methods often refer to the 2 words cause and effect. In the Buddhist methods of the Guocheng Temple, the most mysterious and indescribable one was the 2-mind connection. Taiping Jinren looked at Lu Shui and said with a smile, the Devil Pill at the bottom of the Muddy River and the secret method of the Bloody Demon Church are the cause. Today, I'm here to pick the fruit. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.